Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Emma Winters. This happened in October of 2024, though sometimes I still can't believe it was only a few months ago. Time feels wrong now, stretched thin in places, bunched up in others. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm a wildlife photographer. Was, anyway. I don't pick up my camera much these days, not since what happened in Bankhead National Forest. I keep telling myself I should sell my equipment, but something stops me every time. Maybe because selling it would mean admitting that I'll never go back there to finish what I started. Or maybe because I'm afraid of what might show up in the photos if I ever develop the last roll of film. It was supposed to be a simple trip. A week in Bankhead to photograph the fall colors and wildlife for a conservation magazine feature. The forest is known for its biodiversity, incredible rock formations, and the Sipsey Wilderness, Alabama's largest wilderness area. But locals also whisper about other things: strange lights, people who go in and never come out quite right, and the legend of the Witch of Brushy Creek. I didn't believe any of it. I'd been to Bankhead dozens of times before. It was where I met Marcus 3 years ago while he was training to become a park ranger. It's where we fell in love, and later, where everything fell apart. I hadn't been back since our breakup, but this assignment was too good to pass up. Besides, what were the chances of running into him in 181,000 acres of wilderness? I wasn't going alone this time, though. My best friend Olivia Chen insisted on coming with me after I told her about the assignment. "You're not going back to that place by yourself," she'd said, her practical nature kicking in as usual. Not with all those memories. Olivia had been there for me through the entire messy breakup with Marcus, picking up the pieces when I couldn't even get out of bed. Her girlfriend, Riley Donovan, decided to join too. Riley was Olivia's opposite in many ways. Spontaneous, where Olivia was cautious. Spiritual, where Olivia was skeptical. She talked about energy fields and carried crystals in her pockets. Normally, that kind of thing would make me roll my eyes, but Riley had a way of making even the most cynical person consider the possibility of something more out there. And then there was Jack, my 3-year-old German Shepherd. I'd adopted him after the breakup, a loyal companion who didn't ask questions or offer unwanted advice. Just unconditional love and a warning growl whenever something didn't feel right. We arrived at Bankhead on a Tuesday, the forest already transformed by autumn. The hickories and sweet gums blazed yellow and orange against the deep green of the pines. We set up camp near Brushy Creek, close enough to hear the water but not so close that we'd get caught in a flash flood if it rained. I'd picked the spot carefully, both for the photography opportunities and because it was far from Marcus's usual patrol area. "This place is gorgeous," Riley said, spinning around to take in the forest. "The energy here is so intense. Can you feel it?" Olivia shook her head with a fond smile. "The only thing I feel is how badly I need a shower after that drive." I was preoccupied with setting up my tent, my mind already mapping out shooting locations. Jack paced the perimeter of our campsite, his ears perked forward, occasionally stopping to sniff at the air. His behavior didn't worry me at first. New places always made him vigilant. "I want to get some shots before we lose the light," I told them once we were set up. "I'll be back before dark." "Take Jack with you," Olivia suggested, eyeing the dense forest. "I don't like the idea of you wandering alone." "I'm never really alone in these woods," I said, but I clipped Jack's leash to his collar anyway. The truth was, I didn't want to be alone either. Not here. We followed a narrow trail that wound alongside Brushy Creek, the water clear and swift over smooth stones. October in Alabama isn't cold, but there was a chill in the air that seemed to intensify as we went deeper into the forest. I stopped frequently to take photos, a cluster of ghost pipe pushing through the leaf litter, a barred owl watching us from a low branch, the way the light filtered through the canopy. Jack was on edge the entire time, his body tense and his gaze darting between the trees. When we reached a small clearing about a mile from camp, he stopped abruptly and growled, the sound low and warning. "What is it, boy?" I knelt beside him, following his gaze but seeing nothing unusual, just trees and shadows and the creek burbling nearby. That's when I noticed the carvings. At first glance, they looked like ordinary tree damage, the kind left by lightning or animals, but as I moved closer, I could see they were deliberate. Strange symbols etched into the bark of 5 trees arranged in a rough circle around the clearing. They reminded me of runes, but not quite. More jagged, almost violent, like they'd been carved in a hurry with something dull. I raised my camera to document them, but when I looked through the viewfinder, the symbols seemed to shift and blur. I adjusted the focus, but it didn't help. Through the lens, the markings appeared to be moving slightly, as if they were breathing. I lowered the camera, blinking hard. The symbols were static again, just weird carvings in tree bark. Maybe the light was playing tricks on me, or maybe I was more tired than I'd realized. "Come on, Jack," I said, tugging gently on his leash. "Let's head back." He didn't move, his attention fixed on something in the trees beyond the clearing. I followed his gaze again, and this time I caught a glimpse of movement, a dark shape slipping behind a large oak. It could have been anything: a deer, a hiker, a shadow. But deep down, I knew it wasn't any of those things. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding thin in the vastness of the forest. "Is someone there?" No response except for the whisper of wind through the leaves and Jack's continued growling. My heart rate picked up. The clearing suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable. The symbols on the trees seemed to be watching us. I took one more quick photo of the carvings. Evidence, though of what, I wasn't sure, and then we hurried back toward camp, Jack pulling so hard on the leash that I nearly lost my grip several times. The sun was setting by the time we returned, the forest growing darker by the minute. Olivia had a fire going, and Riley was stringing small battery-powered lights between the trees to mark the boundaries of our campsite. "You were gone a while," Olivia said, eyeing Jack's anxious pacing. "Everything okay?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to tell them about the strange symbols and the shape I'd seen, or thought I'd seen. But another part of me, the practical part, said it was nothing. Just my imagination working overtime in a place filled with complicated memories. "Fine," I lied, busying myself with checking my camera gear. "Just lost track of time." Riley gave me a knowing look. This forest has a way of doing that. We ate dinner around the fire, dehydrated camping meals that never taste as good as they look on the package, and talked about plans for the next day. I wanted to hike deeper into the Sipsey wilderness to photograph some of the waterfalls. Olivia suggested sticking to marked trails since the area was known for being easy to get lost in. Riley was content to go wherever the energy led us. As night settled fully around us, the forest came alive with sound. Frogs, insects, the occasional hoot of an owl. Normal nighttime forest sounds. Yet something felt off. The spaces between those sounds seemed too quiet, too expectant, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Jack refused to settle, pacing between the tents and staring into the darkness beyond our firelight. I tried to coax him to lie down, but he ignored me, something he never did. "Your dog's freaking me out," Olivia finally said, watching Jack with concern. "What's got him so worked up?" "Probably just wildlife," I said, but I didn't believe it. Riley was uncharacteristically quiet, her usual bubbly energy dimmed. She kept touching the crystals hanging from a leather cord around her neck, turning them over and over in her fingers. "You okay?" I asked her. She took a deep breath before responding. "There's something here with us." Olivia rolled her eyes. "Babe, not now with the ghost stories." "I'm serious," Riley insisted. "I can feel it. Something watching us. Something hungry." A shiver ran up my spine that had nothing to do with the cooling night air. I thought about the symbols on the trees, the dark shape I'd glimpsed, but I pushed the thoughts away. I had enough real things to worry about without letting Riley's supernatural sensitivities get to me. "I'm going to turn in," I announced, standing up. "Early start tomorrow." Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay in my tent with Jack pressed against my side, listening to the forest and the occasional murmurs from Olivia and Riley's tent nearby. Every time I started to drift off, some small sound would jerk me back to wakefulness. A twig snapping, leaves rustling, what might have been footsteps moving around our camp. At some point, I must have fallen asleep because I woke suddenly to Jack's wet nose pressing against my cheek. The tent was pitch black, and Jack was making that low, threatening growl again. I fumbled for my phone to check the time, 3:17 a.m., and used its dim light to look at Jack. He was facing the tent entrance, hackles raised, utterly focused on whatever was outside. "It's nothing," I whispered, trying to convince myself as much as him. "Just an animal." Then I heard it, a soft, deliberate scratching on the outside of my tent. Not the random brushing of branches or the skittering of small creatures. This was methodical, intentional. It moved slowly around the perimeter of the tent, pausing occasionally as if whatever was making the sound was listening for me. Jack's growl intensified, but he didn't bark. That scared me more than anything. Jack always barked at threats. This was different. This was fear. The scratching stopped directly outside the section of tent by my head. I held my breath, straining to hear anything that might tell me what was out there. For several long seconds there was nothing but silence. Then a whisper, so quiet I almost missed it. "Emma." My name, spoken in a voice that was almost familiar but distorted somehow, like it was coming through water. "Emma, come out." I clamped my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. That voice, it sounded like Marcus, but wrong, hollow. My ex-boyfriend shouldn't even know I was here. Jack lunged toward the tent wall, snapping and snarling now. I grabbed his collar, holding him back, terrified of what might happen if the tent tore. "Emma." The voice came again, more insistent. "I know you're awake. Let me in." My whole body was rigid with fear. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a dream, a nightmare brought on by being back in this place with all its painful memories. "Go away," I finally managed to say, my voice shaking. A soft laugh answered me, followed by silence. Complete silence. Even the normal forest sounds had stopped. I don't know how long I sat there clutching Jack's collar, listening for any sign that whatever had been outside my tent was still there. Eventually, the regular nighttime chorus of frogs and insects resumed, but I didn't sleep again that night. When dawn finally broke, I unzipped my tent with trembling hands and peered outside. The campsite looked normal. The fire pit cold and gray, Olivia and Riley's tent still zipped up tight, our supplies untouched. I stepped out cautiously, Jack pressed against my leg. That's when I saw them. The same strange symbols I'd found in the clearing, now carved into the trunk of a tree at the edge of our camp. Fresh cuts in the bark, sap still oozing from them. I was still staring at the carvings when Olivia emerged from her tent, yawning and stretching. "Morning," she said, then frowned when she saw my face. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I pointed wordlessly at the tree. Olivia walked over to examine the markings, her frown deepening. "That's creepy. Were these here yesterday?" I shook my head. "Someone was outside my tent last night. They said my name." Olivia's expression shifted from concern to alarm. "What? Why didn't you call out for us?" "I thought I was dreaming at first, and then—" I broke off as Riley joined us, looking unusually pale. "Did you guys hear it too?" Riley asked immediately. "The whispering?" Olivia looked between us, her practical mind clearly trying to make sense of what we were saying. "Okay, both of you need to tell me exactly what happened last night." We compared notes over a hasty breakfast. Riley had heard whispering too, but couldn't make out what it was saying. Just an urgent, insistent murmuring that seemed to circle their tent for nearly an hour. Olivia hadn't heard anything, but she had woken briefly to find Riley sitting up, wide-eyed and trembling. We should pack up and move camp, Olivia decided. Probably just some local kids messing with us, but I don't like it. It wasn't kids, Riley said quietly. It was her. Her who? I asked, though part of me already knew what Riley was going to say. The witch, Abigail Wicker. I did some reading about local legends before we came. She's supposed to haunt these woods, especially around Brushy Creek. They say she was accused of witchcraft back in the 1800s, drowned in the creek, and now she lures hikers off trails and collects them. Olivia made an exasperated sound. That's a campfire story, babe. Every forest has one. Maybe, Riley conceded. But those symbols are real, and so was whatever I heard last night. I didn't mention that the voice had sounded like Marcus. That was too strange, too personal. Instead, I focused on the practical problem at hand. I need to finish this assignment. We have 5 more days out here. If we leave now, I lose the job. Then we move camp, Olivia said firmly, away from here, away from the creek. We decided to relocate to the Pine Torch area, several miles from our original site. It took most of the morning to break camp and hike to the new location, which was more open and closer to one of the forest's established campgrounds. We wouldn't have as much privacy, but at that point, the idea of other people nearby was more comforting than concerning. I tried to focus on work that afternoon, photographing a family of white-tailed deer and some of the impressive rock formations that make Bankhead famous. But my mind kept drifting back to the symbols and that voice outside my tent. Jack stayed glued to my side, still on alert, still sensing something I couldn't see. As the sun began to set, we returned to our new camp to find an unexpected visitor waiting for us. My heart nearly stopped when I saw him, Marcus Fletcher in his park ranger uniform, sitting calmly by the fire pit we'd set up. "Emma," he said, standing as we approached. His voice was normal now, warm even, not the distorted whisper from the night before. "I thought that might be you. Ranger Station got a report about photographers in the area." 3 years hadn't changed him much. Still tall and broad-shouldered, with the same dark curls and easy smile that had drawn me to him in the first place. But seeing him brought back everything. The good memories and the painful ending when his dedication to the job had eventually pushed us apart. "Marcus," I managed to say, "I didn't think you'd be working this part of the forest." "I cover most of the northern section now," he replied, his eyes moving from me to Olivia and Riley. "You must be Emma's friends. Marcus Fletcher." He extended his hand, the perfect professional. Olivia hesitated before shaking it. "We actually moved camp today because someone was messing with us last night. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Marcus's expression shifted to concern. "What do you mean, messing with you?" I described the symbols and the whispering, carefully omitting that it had sounded like him. As I talked, I noticed Jack's reaction to Marcus. Hackles raised, a continuous low growl in his throat. "Jack, enough," I said sharply, but he didn't stop. He'd never met Marcus before, had no reason to dislike him, but his hostility was unmistakable. "Sounds like you had a rough night," Marcus said when I finished. "Those symbols, I've seen them before, usually after hikers report strange experiences. The official line is that it's vandalism, but—" He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "But what?" Riley pressed. Marcus glanced around as if checking whether anyone else could hear, then lowered his voice. "Look, I've worked in these woods for 5 years now. I've seen things I can't explain. Areas where compasses spin in circles and GPS devices fail. Hikers who swear they followed the trail but ended up miles from where they should be. People who come out of the forest, different." A chill ran through me. Different how? Like something's riding along inside them. Marcus met my eyes directly. "I know how it sounds, but I've learned to trust my instincts out here, and right now, my instincts are telling me you 3 should pack up and leave." "I can't," I said immediately. "I have an assignment to finish." Marcus ran a hand through his hair. a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. "Then let me help. I can show you the best spots, make sure you get what you need quickly, and get you out of here by tomorrow night. After dark, it's not safe." Riley was nodding eagerly. We should listen to him. He knows this place. Olivia looked less convinced, her gaze shifting between Marcus and me, clearly remembering all the tear-soaked nights that had followed our breakup. "How do we know we can trust you?" she asked bluntly. "Liv," I murmured, embarrassed by her directness. But Marcus didn't seem offended. "You don't, but I'm still your best chance of finishing your work and getting out of here safely." Something in his face, some flicker of the Marcus I had once loved so completely, made the decision for me. "Okay," I said, "but we leave at the first sign of anything weird." He gave a short nod. "Deal. I'm off duty now so I can stay with you tonight. We'll head out at first light tomorrow." The relief I felt at having Marcus there surprised me, despite everything. Despite the painful history between us, his presence was reassuring. He knew these woods better than any of us, and whatever was happening, he seemed to understand it, or at least respect the danger it presented. As darkness fell, we built up the fire and prepared dinner. The tension of the previous night had eased somewhat, but hadn't disappeared entirely. Jack still wouldn't go near Marcus, keeping to the opposite side of the fire and watching him with suspicious eyes. "He doesn't usually act like this," I apologized. "Animals sense things we don't," Marcus said simply. The comment hung in the air, nobody quite willing to ask what Jack might be sensing about him. After dinner, Marcus suggested we all stay together in the larger tent rather than splitting up. "Safety in numbers," he said. None of us argued. We arranged our sleeping bags in a tight circle, with Marcus volunteering to take the first watch. "We should be fine here," he said as we settled in. "We're far enough from Brushy Creek." "What's significant about the creek?" I asked, remembering Riley's mention of the witch story. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Local legend says it's where her power is strongest. Abigail Wicker. The stories go back generations. A woman who practiced dark magic, used the creek for rituals. When they tried to kill her, she cursed the waters and the forest around them. They say she's still here, watching, waiting for people to wander too close." "You don't really believe that," Olivia said, but her voice lacked its usual certainty. "What I believe," Marcus replied carefully, "is that something in these woods doesn't want us here, and it knows how to get to us." On that unsettling note, we tried to sleep. I drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of Marcus sitting by the tent entrance, occasionally checking his watch or peering outside. Jack lay pressed against me, tense even in sleep. I was just slipping into a deeper sleep when Riley's voice woke me. "I need to go check on something," she was saying, already halfway to the tent entrance. Marcus blocked her path. "Where do you think you're going?" Riley's face looked strange in the dim light of the lantern. Blank, almost serene. "I heard someone calling. I need to go." "No one's calling," Olivia said, fully awake now and gripping Riley's arm. "Babe, it's the middle of the night." "Let go," Riley said, her voice flat. "She's waiting for me." A jolt of fear shot through me. This wasn't right. This wasn't Riley. Marcus moved quickly, placing himself between Riley and the tent exit. "Who's waiting, Riley? Tell us her name." For a moment, Riley's face contorted with something that looked like pain or confusion. Then it smoothed out again into that eerie calm. "Abigail. She wants to show me something at the creek. Something important." Olivia's face had gone pale. "Riley, listen to me. You're not going anywhere. There's no one out there." "She says you're wrong," Riley replied, her gaze fixed on some point beyond the tent walls. "She says she's been watching us since we arrived. She knows why Emma came back. She knows about Marcus. She knows everything." Marcus and I exchanged alarmed glances. How could Riley know about our history? We hadn't discussed it in front of her. "What does she want?" Marcus asked, his voice carefully controlled. Riley's eyes finally focused on him, and a small, chilling smile curved her lips. You. She's always wanted you, Ranger, ever since you found her old cabin. But she'll take Emma too. And me. All of us, eventually. Without warning, Riley lunged toward the tent entrance with unexpected strength, shoving Marcus aside. Olivia grabbed for her, but Riley was too quick. She unzipped the tent and disappeared into the darkness before any of us could stop her. "Riley!" Olivia screamed, scrambling after her. Marcus caught her arm. "Wait, we need lights, supplies. We can't just run out there blind." "She's heading for the creek," I said, already grabbing my backpack and headlamp. "You said that's where the witch's power is strongest." Jack was barking frantically now, pacing between us and the tent entrance, clearly agitated but unsure what to do. We gathered what we could in seconds. Flashlights, my camera, a first aid kit, Marcus's ranger radio that he said probably wouldn't work but was worth trying. Then we plunged into the forest after Riley, calling her name. The night was moonless, our flashlight beams carving weak paths through the absolute darkness between the trees. "Which way to Brushy Creek from here?" Olivia demanded, her voice tight with panic. Marcus pointed east. "About 2 miles that way. But the terrain is rough, especially at night." "She couldn't have gotten far," I said, trying to sound confident for Olivia's sake. But the truth was, Riley had moved with unnatural speed, and she had a head start. We set off at a jog, Marcus in the lead, Olivia right behind him, me following with Jack. The forest seemed to close in around us, branches reaching for our faces, roots rising to trip our feet. More than once I was certain we were going in circles, the same twisted oak, the same fallen log, but Marcus pressed on with grim determination. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, we heard it, the gurgle and splash of running water, Brushy Creek. "Riley!" Olivia shouted, her voice echoing through the trees. "Riley, where are you?" No answer but the wind in the leaves and the sound of the water. We broke through the tree line to the creek bank, our flashlights sweeping across the water. The creek was wider here than where our original camp had been, the current swift and black in the darkness. And there, in the middle of the water, standing impossibly on the surface as if it were solid ground, was Riley. She was facing away from us, looking at something on the far bank that our lights couldn't quite reach. When she turned at Olivia's cry, her face was transformed, gaunt, her eyes sunken and dark, her mouth stretched in a rictus smile that wasn't hers. "You came," she said, her voice overlaid with another, older voice. "She said you would." "Riley, please," Olivia begged, moving toward the water's edge. "This isn't you. Come back to us." Riley, or the thing wearing Riley's face, laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "But I like it here. Abigail has shown me so many things. The truth about this place. The truth about all of you." Marcus put a restraining hand on Olivia's shoulder as she tried to step into the creek. "Don't," he warned. "The water is part of it. Part of her power." "What do we do?" I whispered, my camera forgotten in my hands. Jack was whining continuously now, pressing against my legs as if trying to push me away from the water. "We have to draw her out," Marcus said quietly. "Away from the creek." "How?" Olivia demanded. But before Marcus could answer, Riley spoke again, her double voice carrying clearly across the water. "You shouldn't have come back, Emma. This place was never done with you, with either of you." Her gaze shifted to Marcus. "She remembers you, Ranger. Remembers how you found her things, took them. She wants them back." Marcus stiffened beside me. "What is she talking about?" I asked him. He didn't look at me, his attention fixed on Riley. "There was a cabin," he said under his breath. "Deep in the woods, not on any map. I found it my first year here. Inside were things, books, objects. I reported it, turned everything over to the Park Service." "You disturbed her rest," Riley said, still smiling that terrible smile. "Both of you did. Your love, your pain, your broken promises. They stirred her from her sleep, and now she's awake, hungry. As she spoke, the water around her began to move strangely, swirling and rising as if responding to her words. Dark shapes appeared beneath the surface, hands perhaps, or snake-like tendrils, reaching upward. "Run," Marcus said suddenly, his voice tight with fear. "Back to camp, now." "I'm not leaving without Riley," Olivia protested. "That's not Riley anymore," he snapped, "and if we don't move now, we'll lose our chance." The decision was taken from us when Riley suddenly pitched forward, collapsing face first into the creek. Olivia screamed and rushed toward the water, Marcus right behind her. I hesitated only a second before following, ignoring Jack's frantic barking. The water was shockingly cold, numbing my legs instantly as I waded in behind Olivia and Marcus. Riley's body floated face down in the middle of the creek, her arms spread wide, unmoving. The strange swirling had stopped, the water now calm and innocent except for the ripples from our movement. Marcus reached her first, grabbing her shoulder to turn her over. As Riley's face came up out of the water, her eyes snapped open, totally black, no whites visible, and her hand shot out, gripping Marcus's wrist with impossible strength. "Found you," she said, her voice now entirely that older, other voice. Then she pulled, and Marcus went under with a startled shout. Olivia lunged for Riley, but she too was dragged beneath the surface in an instant, disappearing without even a chance to scream. I stumbled backward, terror locking my muscles, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. The surface of the creek was smooth again, as if nothing had happened, no sign of the three people who had just been there. "Marcus!" I shouted. "Olivia! Riley!" Nothing but the soft chuckle of the creek as it flowed around the rocks. Then a hand broke the surface. Olivia's, I thought, recognizing the silver ring on her finger. I rushed forward again, reaching for her, managing to grab her wrist. Her head emerged, gasping, her face a mask of terror. "Pull," she choked out. "Something has her. It won't let go." I planted my feet on the slippery creek bed and pulled with all my strength. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Olivia began to move toward me, inch by painful inch. As she neared the bank, I could see Riley's hand locked around her ankle, dragging her back. But Riley wasn't surfacing, as if she were somehow breathing underwater. With a final heave, I pulled Olivia onto the bank, and Riley's grip finally broke. Olivia collapsed onto the ground, coughing and shaking violently. "Marcus," she managed between gasps. "Still down there?" I turned back to the creek, scanning the dark water desperately. Nothing moved on the surface. No sign of Marcus or Riley. Then a disturbance in the middle of the creek. Bubbles. A swirl of current. Marcus erupted from the water, thrashing, fighting against something we couldn't see. He spotted us on the bank and began to swim toward us, his strokes powerful but strangely slow, as if he were moving through something thicker than water. "Go!" he shouted when he was halfway to us. "Get out of here! Take Olivia and run!" "Not without you," I called back, wading into the shallows again to help him. "Emma, don't," Olivia warned, still too weak to stand. "That's what it wants." I hesitated, torn between self-preservation and the need to help Marcus. In that moment of indecision, the choice was made for me. Marcus let out a strangled cry as he was yanked backward, something dark wrapping around his chest and pulling him toward the center of the creek. But before he went under again, he managed to throw something toward me, a small object that landed with a soft thud on the bank near my feet. "Burn it!" he shouted, his voice already gargling with water. "The book! Burn it all!" Then he was gone, the creek closing over him with barely a ripple. I scrambled to pick up what he had thrown, a small leather pouch, crude and ancient-looking, tied with some kind of sinew. Inside was a scrap of yellowed paper covered in the same symbols we'd seen carved into the trees, and a small, weathered book bound in what looked like hide, its pages brittle with age. Jack was going crazy now, barking and snapping at the creek, at the forest, at shadows only he could see. I shoved the pouch and its contents into my jacket pocket and helped Olivia to her feet. "We have to go," I said, my voice cracking. "Now." "But Riley, Marcus," Olivia protested weakly, still staring at the creek. "They're gone," I told her, the words like ash in my mouth. "And we will be too if we don't move." I half-carried, half-dragged Olivia away from the creek, back toward the direction of camp, Jack leading the way. The forest seemed different now. More alive, more malevolent. Branches caught at our clothes, roots rose to trip us, and the darkness between the trees felt solid, watching, hungry. We hadn't gone more than a quarter mile when Olivia suddenly stumbled and cried out in pain. She collapsed against a tree, clutching her ankle. "I can't," she gasped. "Something's wrong. It feels like something's still holding on." I aimed my flashlight at her ankle and nearly dropped the light in horror. The skin where Riley had gripped her was black and blistered, as if burned by acid. But worse than that, it was moving, the darkness spreading slowly up her calf like ink in water. "What is that?" I whispered, unable to look away. Olivia's face was gray with pain and fear. "It started as soon as we left the creek. I thought it was just cold, but—" She broke off with a moan as the blackness pulsed and crept higher. I didn't know what to do. We were miles from any help, in the middle of a forest that seemed intent on swallowing us, being hunted by something I couldn't begin to understand. Marcus was gone. Riley was not Riley anymore, and now whatever had taken them was coming for Olivia too. The leather pouch in my pocket suddenly felt heavier, more present. Marcus's last words echoed in my mind. "Burn it. The book. Burn it all." Did he mean this book? How would burning it help us now? "We need to start a fire," I told Olivia, making the decision on instinct alone. "Here? Now?" She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Trust me." I began gathering the driest leaves and twigs I could find, piling them at the base of a large oak. With shaking hands, I dug through my backpack for the waterproof matches I always carried. "Whatever you're going to do, hurry," Olivia said through gritted teeth. "It's getting worse." The blackness had reached her knee now, writhing beneath her skin like something alive. She was shivering violently, her face slick with sweat despite the cool night air. I finally got a small flame going, nursing it carefully until it caught on the larger sticks. As soon as the fire was strong enough, I pulled out the book from the pouch. It was tiny, hardly bigger than my palm, but felt strangely heavy. The cover was unmarked except for a single symbol, the same one I'd seen repeated in the tree carvings. For a brief, mad moment, I was tempted to open it, to try to understand what we were facing. But Olivia's pained gasp snapped me back to reality. There was no time. I threw the book onto the fire. For a second, nothing happened. Then the flames turned an unnatural green, shooting upward with a roar that sounded almost like a scream. The book didn't burn so much as melt, the cover bubbling and running like wax, the pages turning black and curling in on themselves. As the book burned, Olivia cried out, a sound of both pain and relief. The blackness on her leg seemed to recoil from her skin, drawing back toward her ankle. It didn't disappear completely, but it stopped spreading, retreating to the original point of contact. "It's working," she breathed, her eyes wide with disbelief. The fire continued to burn an eerie green, casting sickly light across the forest floor. In that strange illumination, I noticed something moving between the trees. A figure, vaguely human in shape but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, its movements jerky and unnatural. Jack saw it too, backing toward me with his teeth bared, a continuous growl rumbling from his chest. "We need to go," I said, helping Olivia up again. "Can you walk?" She nodded shakily. "Better now. Still hurts, but I can manage." We left the fire burning behind us, stumbling through the darkness as quickly as Olivia's injury would allow. I kept glancing back, certain we were being followed, but seeing nothing concrete, just movement in the corner of my eye, gone when I turned to look directly. The forest seemed to be working against us now. paths that should have led back to camp ended in impassable thickets. Landmarks I thought I recognized turned out to be unfamiliar when we reached them. My phone's GPS app showed us walking in circles, the little blue dot jumping erratically across the screen before the battery died completely. "We're lost," Olivia finally said, stating the obvious. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten just slightly. Dawn wasn't far off. We'd been wandering for hours. I was about to agree with her when Jack suddenly perked up, his ears forward, his posture alert rather than defensive for the first time since this nightmare began. "What is it, boy?" I asked, too exhausted to feel much hope. Jack barked once, tail wagging, and trotted ahead of us with purpose. After all we'd been through, I was willing to trust his instincts more than my own. We followed him through a dense stand of pines and emerged unexpectedly onto a narrow dirt road. The fire road, I realized with a surge of relief. This connects to the main park entrance. If we follow it west, we should reach the ranger station in a few miles. Olivia nearly collapsed with relief. Thank God. The road was easier going than the forest had been, and with the growing light, some of the supernatural terror of the night began to recede. We made good time despite Olivia's injury, the miles passing under our feet as we pushed on in grim silence, both lost in our own thoughts. I couldn't stop thinking about Marcus, about the look on his face as he was dragged under, about what he'd known, what he hadn't told me. He'd recognized those symbols, had seen them before. He'd found something, a cabin, artifacts, disturbed something that should have been left alone. And now he was gone, along with Riley. Had he come to our camp last night because he knew we were in danger? Or had he been led there by whatever had taken him? I remembered the voice outside my tent, how it had sounded like him, but wrong. Had that been him, already under the witch's influence, or something else wearing his voice like a disguise? The questions chased each other around my mind, unanswerable, maddening. The sun was fully up by the time we spotted the ranger station in the distance, a welcome sight of normality after the horrors of the night. My relief was short-lived, however, when I saw the gathering of vehicles outside, police cars, an ambulance, several official trucks with the National Forest Service logo. "Something's wrong," I murmured, a fresh wave of dread washing over me. As we approached, a ranger I didn't recognize spotted us and jogged in our direction. His face registered shock when he got close enough to see our condition. Soaked, filthy, bloodied in places I hadn't even noticed. "You're alive," he said, sounding genuinely surprised. "We've had search teams out all night." "Search teams?" I repeated, confused. "For us." "For anyone who was with Ranger Fletcher," he clarified. "His truck was found at a campsite, but no sign of him. Another ranger reported hearing screams around 4 a.m. We've been searching since dawn." "He's gone," Olivia said flatly. "They both are, Riley Donovan and Marcus Fletcher." The ranger's expression shifted to one of professional concern. "Ma'am, you're injured. Let's get you both to the medical team, and then we can take your statement." The next few hours passed in a blur. Paramedics treated Olivia's ankle. They diagnosed it as a severe chemical burn of unknown origin and checked us both for hypothermia and shock. Police officers and park officials questioned us separately, their faces growing increasingly skeptical as we told our stories. No, we didn't know what had caused the burn. No, we didn't know where Marcus and Riley had gone. Yes, we had been near Brushy Creek. No, we hadn't been drinking or using drugs. Yes, we understood the seriousness of 2 missing persons. They didn't believe us. That much was clear. In the harsh light of day, our story of symbols and whispering and a woman standing on water sounded like the product of panic and exhaustion. Even I was beginning to question what we'd seen, what we'd experienced. The only tangible evidence we had was Olivia's injury, which puzzled the medical personnel, and the remaining contents of the leather pouch, the scrap of paper with symbols that meant nothing to the authorities. The book was gone, burned to ash in a fire we'd left burning in the forest, which earned us a stern lecture about fire safety in a drought-prone area. They're going to think we did something to them, Olivia whispered to me as we waited to be released. That we're responsible somehow. I knew she was right. 2 people missing, possibly dead, and we were the last ones to see them alive, with a wild story about supernatural events that no rational person would believe. We know what happened, I told her, trying to sound more confident than I felt. That's what matters. But I wasn't sure that was true. Doubt was already creeping in, reality asserting itself over the inexplicable events of the night. Had Riley really stood on water, or had she been standing on a submerged log or rock? Had Marcus actually been pulled under by something, or had he simply gotten caught in a strong current? Was the spreading blackness on Olivia's ankle some kind of infection or reaction, rather than something otherworldly? I might have convinced myself it was all somehow explainable, might have buried the truth under a comforting blanket of rationalization, if it hadn't been for what happened as we were finally leaving the ranger station. An elderly man was watching us from the edge of the parking lot, leaning on a gnarled walking stick. Something about his intense gaze made me slow down, made me nudge Olivia to look in his direction. "That's him," she breathed, "from Riley's research, the one who knows about the witch." Old Man Cunningham, I remembered, the name coming back to me from Riley's ramblings about local legends. We approached him cautiously. Up close, he looked ancient, his face deeply lined, his eyes a pale, washed-out blue that had seen too much. "You went to the creek," he said without preamble, his voice like dry leaves rustling. "You woke her up." A chill ran through me despite the warm day. "Who are you?" "Someone who knows what lives in these woods." His gaze flicked to Olivia's bandaged ankle. "She marked you. You'll never be free of her now." Olivia went pale. "What do you mean?" "Abigail doesn't let go once she's got a taste." The old man leaned closer, lowering his voice. "She takes pieces, collects them. Sometimes bodies, sometimes souls, sometimes just memories. But she always takes something." "We burned the book," I told him, not entirely sure why I was engaging with this strange old man except that he was the first person who seemed to understand what we'd experienced. "Marcus threw it to me before he disappeared. We burned it. It seemed to help, to push back whatever was happening to Olivia's leg." Old Man Cunningham nodded slowly. The book was one of her anchors. Burning it would have weakened her, but not destroyed her. Never destroyed. Just sleeping, waiting. "For what?" I asked, dreading the answer. "For someone to come back," he said, his pale eyes fixed on mine. "Someone who carries a piece of her now. Someone like you." My blood ran cold. "Me? I didn't." "The mark isn't always on the skin," he interrupted. "Sometimes it's deeper, in the mind, in the heart, in the memories." He glanced at Jack, who was watching him warily. "Your dog knows. Animals always know." "How do we stop her?" Olivia demanded, her voice shaking. "How do we get Riley and Marcus back?" The old man's expression softened with something like pity. "You don't. What she takes, she keeps. But you—" He pointed a gnarled finger at me. "You need to stay away from this place. Far away, as long as you live." With those ominous words, he turned and walked away, disappearing between the trees at the edge of the parking lot with surprising speed for someone who had appeared so frail. Neither of us spoke as we got into the park service vehicle that would take us back to our car. What was there to say? We'd lost 2 people we cared about to something we couldn't explain or fight, and the only person who seemed to understand had just told us there was no way to get them back. The search for Marcus and Riley continued for 2 weeks. They dragged parts of Brushy Creek, brought in cadaver dogs, combed every inch of the forest around our campsite and the area where we claimed to have last seen them. Nothing was ever found. No bodies, no personal effects, no signs of struggle or violence. The official report eventually listed them as missing, presumed dead by misadventure. The prevailing theory was that they had fallen into the creek during a nighttime excursion and been swept away by flash flooding. their bodies likely trapped underwater or carried miles downstream. Only Olivia and I knew the truth, and we stopped talking about it even to each other after a while. The doubt, the questioning looks, the suggestion that we might have had something to do with their disappearance. It was too much on top of the grief and trauma we already carried. Olivia's ankle never fully healed. The burn-like injury faded to a dark scar, but it remained sensitive to cold and would occasionally throb painfully for no apparent reason, especially at night. I didn't have a visible mark, but old man Cunningham had been right. I carried something with me from that night in Bankhead Forest, something that woke me from sleep with the sound of rushing water in my ears, something that made my skin crawl when I saw certain patterns or symbols that resembled the ones carved into those trees, something that sometimes whispered my name in the darkness in a voice that was almost, but not quite, Marcus's. I never developed the last roll of film from my camera. It sits in my desk drawer, a final link to that night that I can't bring myself to destroy but am too afraid to examine. Sometimes I think I should burn it, like we burned the book. Sometimes I think I should go back to Bankhead, to Brushy Creek, to search for answers or closure or whatever might be left of the people we lost there. But mostly, I stay away. I keep Jack close, take comfort in his animal instincts that warn us both, when something isn't right. I avoid forests and running water, stick to cities and open spaces where ancient things don't dwell. Because I believe old man Cunningham about one thing, if nothing else. What Abigail Wicker takes, she keeps. And I fear that includes a part of me, a part that still connects us, that might someday draw me back to those dark woods and that hungry creek, to join Marcus and Riley in whatever unimaginable existence they now endure. So I tell this story as both confession and warning. Stay away from Brushy Creek in Bankhead National Forest. Don't wander from marked trails. Don't go alone. And if you see strange symbols carved into trees, or hear whispering that sounds like someone you know but not quite right, or feel watched by eyes you cannot see, run. Run, and don't look back. Because in those Alabama woods, some legends are real, and some spirits never rest. And Abigail Wicker is always, always hungry for more. My name is Marcus Reeves. I'm 33 years old. This happened in October of 2024, though sometimes I still wonder if it happened at all. 3 months after I buried my wife, I decided to disappear into the wilderness. Not permanently, though the thought had crossed my mind more than once during those empty nights in our half-empty bed. Just a week hiking alone in Sipsey Wilderness, deep in the Bankhead National Forest of Alabama. 7 days of physical exhaustion to drown out the grief. 7 nights under stars instead of the ceiling I'd stared at for 92 consecutive nights. 7 days where I wouldn't have to pretend to be healing for the benefit of concerned friends and family. I'd picked Sipsey because it was remote enough to feel like genuine wilderness, but established enough that a moderately experienced hiker like myself wouldn't end up as a cautionary tale on some wilderness survival podcast. The land of 1,000 waterfalls, they called it. Ancient forests, deep gorges, and sandstone bluffs. A place where I could get lost without truly being lost. My therapist thought it was a terrible idea. Marcus, isolation amplifies grief. It doesn't diminish it, Dr. Winters had said during our last session before the trip. And you're still in an extremely vulnerable place emotionally. I need to be alone, I'd insisted. Really alone. Not apartment alone where delivery drivers keep bringing me food I didn't order because my mother called them. Not alone, but checking in hourly because my sister thinks I'm one sad song away from driving into a tree. Dr. Winters had sighed, folding her hands in that particular way she did when she was about to compromise. Will you at least take your medications and check in when you have service? I'd agreed, mostly to end the conversation. The meds were in my pack, untouched since I'd left. The promise to check in was rendered moot by the fact that I'd deliberately chosen a wilderness area notorious for its non-existent cell service. The first day and a half had been perfect. I'd parked at the Sipsey Recreation Area trailhead early Thursday morning, shouldered my backpack, and headed into the forest along Trail 209. The October weather was ideal, cool enough that hiking didn't leave me drenched in sweat, but warm enough that the nights in my tent were comfortable. The forest was a riot of color, the maples and hickories showing off their autumn finery. I'd made it about 8 miles in before setting up camp the first night, eating a simple dehydrated meal as darkness fell. That night, I slept dreamlessly for the first time since Elena died. I woke to birdsong the next morning, feeling something close to peace as I watched the sun filter through crimson leaves. I packed up and continued deeper into the wilderness, toward the area locals called the Hollows, a network of sandstone canyons less frequented by the casual day hikers and weekend warriors. By late afternoon on the second day, I'd reached a spot where Big Tree Fork and Thompson Creek converge. The forest felt different here, older somehow. The trees were massive, some of them hundreds of years old, their roots twisting over the rocky ground like arthritic fingers. I found a flat spot about 50 yards from the creek and set up camp. That's when I noticed the first strange thing. While gathering firewood, I found a small pile of stones arranged in a perfect circle about 3 feet in diameter. Inside the circle was a dead fox, its body unnaturally flattened as if it had been pressed between 2 heavy objects. There were no visible wounds, but its eyes were missing, and its mouth was stuffed with what appeared to be small white flowers. I should have been more disturbed than I was. Instead, I simply stepped around it, continuing my search for dry branches. I'd spent enough time outdoors to know that nature produced its own horrors, and that other hikers sometimes left bizarre calling cards. College kids, probably, I told myself. Some sick initiation ritual for a fraternity. As dusk approached, I got my small camp stove going and heated water for my freeze-dried beef stroganoff. The creek burbled nearby, a comforting white noise that almost, but not quite, drowned out the inexplicable sense of being watched that had settled between my shoulder blades. I was just cleaning up my dinner when I heard a human voice call out from the gathering darkness. "Hello? Is someone there?" The voice was female, slightly husky, carrying a note of relief. I hesitated only a moment before answering. "Over here. I've got a camp set up." A moment later, a beam of light appeared between the trees, bobbing closer until it illuminated a woman about my age. She was of medium height and athletic build, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing well-worn hiking gear that suggested experience in the outdoors. "Thank God," she said, lowering her flashlight. "I thought I was going to have to spend the night huddled under a rock. I'm Eliza. Eliza Mercer." "Marcus," I replied, not offering my last name. "Are you lost?" She shook her head, setting down her pack with a weary sigh. "Not exactly. My hiking partner and I had a disagreement. He went back to the car, but I wanted to finish the trail. Then I got turned around trying to find a good campsite before dark." I gestured to the small clearing. "You're welcome to share the space. I've got extra water if you need it." "That's incredibly kind," she said, her smile revealing slightly crooked front teeth that somehow made her more approachable. "I've got my own tent and supplies. I just didn't fancy spending the night completely alone out here." As she set up her tent about 20 feet from mine, we exchanged the usual pleasantries of strangers brought together by circumstance. She was from Huntsville, she told me, worked as an environmental scientist, and hiked whenever she could escape the lab. I offered the bare minimum about myself, a software developer from Birmingham taking some time off. I didn't mention Elena, didn't want to see the pitying look across Eliza's face when the word widow entered the conversation. After her tent was erected, Eliza pulled out a small flask and offered it to me. "Bourbon," she said. "Good for keeping the chill away." I accepted, taking a small sip before passing it back. The whiskey burned pleasantly down my throat. "So," she said after taking her own drink, "what brings you to the hollows? Most people stick to the main trails." I shrugged. "Wanted solitude, I guess." "Don't worry," she laughed. "I'll be out of your hair in the morning. I'm heading toward Eagle Creek Falls tomorrow." "That's my general direction, too," I found myself saying, surprising myself. Maybe we could hike together for a bit. Safety in numbers and all that. Something flickered across her face, too quick to identify, before she smiled again. "I'd like that." We talked a bit longer as the darkness deepened around us, the fire casting long shadows that seemed to move independently of the flames. Eliza was easy to talk to, asking questions but not pushing when I gave vague answers. Eventually, we retreated to our respective tents, and I fell into a fitful sleep. I dreamed of Elena that night. Not the wasted, pain-racked version from the hospital, but the vibrant woman I'd married. In the dream, she was trying to tell me something important, her face intense with urgency, but no sound came from her moving lips. Behind her, a darkness gathered, taking the shape of a woman with impossibly long arms. I woke with a start, just as the shadow woman reached for Elena's throat. Dawn was breaking, the forest filled with that peculiar pre-morning stillness. I checked my watch, 5:47 a.m. Too early to be up, but I knew from experience that sleep wouldn't return now. I quietly exited my tent, intending to refill my water bottles at the creek before Eliza woke. The circle of stones I'd found yesterday was now directly between our two tents. The fox was gone, replaced by a small pile of teeth. Animal or human, I couldn't tell. I froze, my heart racing. I hadn't misremembered the location. I was certain the stone circle had been at least 100 yards away, near where I'd gathered firewood. Now, it was centered perfectly between our sleeping areas, as if placed there deliberately during the night. I glanced at Eliza's tent. It remained zipped shut, no sign of movement within. Could she have moved the stones? But why? And when? I'd always been a light sleeper, even more so since Elena died. I quietly approached the circle and crouched down to examine the teeth. They were small and yellowed, definitely not human. Rodent, maybe, or small predator. As I leaned closer, a sudden breeze swirled through the camp, scattering the teeth in all directions. Several pinged against my tent, sounding like the beginnings of a rainstorm. "Morning," came Eliza's voice from behind me. I startled, nearly losing my balance as I spun around. She was standing outside her tent, already fully dressed in hiking clothes, her hair neatly pulled back. Her cheeks were flushed with the morning chill, her eyes bright and alert. Nothing in her demeanor suggested she'd created a bizarre teeth-filled stone circle during the night. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, pulling a granola bar from her pocket. "Fine," I lied, standing up. "Just checking something." "What's that?" She peered around me at the stone circle, her expression curious. "I found it yesterday while gathering wood," I said carefully, watching her face. "But it was farther away from camp." She frowned, taking a step closer. "That's strange. Wind couldn't have moved stones that size." "No," I agreed. "It couldn't." Eliza met my eyes, her expression unreadable. "Maybe someone else is out here? Playing games?" "Maybe." I didn't believe it, and I suspected she didn't either. We ate breakfast in relative silence, the easy camaraderie of the previous evening replaced by a subtle tension. As we packed up our respective camps, I kept glancing at the stone circle, half expecting it to move again before my eyes. When we finally hit the trail around 7:30, I felt relieved to leave the campsite behind. We headed east, following Thompson Creek upstream toward Eagle Creek. The path wasn't official, more of a game trail that sometimes disappeared entirely, forcing us to navigate by the creek and the position of the morning sun. About an hour into our hike, I pulled out my compass to confirm our direction. The needle spun wildly, rotating in complete circles without settling. "That's odd," I said, showing Eliza. She frowned, taking the compass from my hand. As her fingers brushed mine, I felt an unexpected chill race up my arm. "Electronic interference, maybe?" she suggested, handing it back. "It's an analog compass," I replied. "Not digital," she shrugged. "Some rocks in these parts have high iron content. Could be throwing it off." It was a reasonable explanation, but something about the way she said it felt rehearsed, as if she'd been expecting the compass to malfunction. I tucked it back into my pocket and pulled out my phone to check the GPS. "No service, of course," I muttered, "but the GPS should still—" I stopped mid-sentence. My phone was dead. This wasn't particularly surprising in itself. Cell batteries drain faster when constantly searching for non-existent signals, but I distinctly remembered charging it fully using my portable power bank the previous evening. Eliza was watching me, her head tilted slightly. "Everything okay?" "Battery's dead," I said, showing her the black screen. "Good thing we don't really need it," she replied, her tone light. "The creek will lead us straight to Eagle Creek, and from there it's an easy hike to the falls." "Right," I agreed, pocketing my phone. "Lead the way." As we continued hiking, I began to notice other unsettling details. The forest had grown quieter, no birdsong, no scurrying of small animals through the underbrush. The trees seemed to lean inward over the trail, creating a claustrophobic tunnel of branches. Twice I spotted more of those small white flowers, growing in perfect circles despite it being the wrong season for wildflowers. We stopped for lunch on a flat rock overlooking a section of the creek where it tumbled over a series of small ledges. As I pulled out my food, beef jerky, trail mix, a slightly bruised apple, I noticed that the jerky, which had been perfectly preserved yesterday, was now covered in a thin layer of white mold. "That's strange," I said, showing Eliza. "This was fine yesterday." She leaned over to look, her eyebrows drawing together. "The air is pretty humid here. Things spoil quickly." "Not this quickly," I insisted, "and not with preservatives." She shrugged again, that same dismissive gesture, and bit into her own lunch, some kind of homemade energy bar. "The wilderness doesn't follow human rules, Marcus." I didn't respond, instead picking the mold off as best I could before eating the jerky anyway. I needed the protein, and I wasn't about to waste food when I still had several days of hiking ahead. As we ate, I decided to probe a bit. "Have you hiked this area before?" "A few times," she replied. "It's one of my favorite spots in Alabama. Not many people know about the hollows. Ever heard any stories about this place? Local legends, that sort of thing?" Something flickered in her eyes. Caution. "Perhaps." "What kind of legends?" I gestured vaguely at the surrounding forest. "Just wondering if there's any folklore. Most wilderness areas have stories." She was silent for a moment, studying me. Then she said, "There are always stories. Most of them are just ways to keep children from wandering too far into the woods." "And the others?" Eliza smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Some of them might have kernels of truth." "Like what?" She sighed, setting down her half-eaten energy bar. "You really want to know? It might make sleeping in these woods harder." "I'm curious." "All right," she said, her voice dropping slightly. "The old-timers around here talk about something they call Old Mother Crow. Supposedly, she was once a woman from a settler family back in the 1800s. The story goes that her husband and children were killed by disease or raiders, depends who's telling it, and she went mad with grief, fled into these woods, and somehow changed." "Changed how?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual despite the prickle of unease traveling up my spine. "They say she made some kind of deal with whatever dark things live in the oldest parts of these forests, gained the ability to wear other skins, animal or human." Eliza traced a pattern in the dirt with a stick. "A skinwalker, I guess you'd call it, though that's borrowing from a different tradition." "And people believe this?" "Some do," she said. "Enough that most locals won't camp in the hollows overnight. They say she's still out here, watching, waiting for someone to wander too far from the trails." Her voice had taken on a storyteller's cadence. "They say you'll know she's hunting you when time starts to feel wrong, nights that last too long, days that pass too quickly, when animals appear dead in strange ways, when your supplies rot overnight and your instruments fail." My stomach tightened. The dead fox, the malfunctioning compass, my inexplicably dead phone, the moldy jerky. "Of course," Eliza continued, her tone lightening. "It's just a story. Every wilderness area has some version of it. The ghost, the witch, the monster that keeps people afraid of the deep woods." She stood up, brushing dirt from her pants. "Ready to keep moving? I'd like to reach Eagle Creek before sundown." I nodded, repacking my food and trying to shake off the cold feeling her story had left me with. Just a coincidence, I told myself. The fox was probably killed by a predator and moved by scavengers. The compass could have been affected by mineral deposits. Batteries fail. Food spoils. But as we resumed our hike, following the increasingly rocky path alongside the creek, I couldn't stop myself from scanning the forest around us, searching for movement in the shadows between the trees. By mid-afternoon, the character of the landscape had changed. The gentle woodland we'd been traveling through gave way to dramatic sandstone bluffs and deeper gorges. The creek now ran through a narrow canyon, forcing us to climb higher on the slopes to find passable routes. The going was slower, and the sky had begun to darken with gathering clouds. "Looks like rain," I said, glancing upward. "Maybe we should start looking for a campsite." Eliza checked her watch, frowning slightly. "It's only 2:30. We can make it a few more miles before dark." I checked my own watch, confusion washing over me. It read 4:45 p.m. "My watch says it's almost 5, I said, showing her. She glanced at it, then back at her own. "That's strange. Mine's usually accurate." I tried to remember when I'd last checked the time. It had been around noon when we stopped for lunch, and it hadn't felt like we'd been hiking for nearly 5 hours since then. But the gathering darkness suggested my watch was correct. "Let's find somewhere to camp," I insisted. "The weather's turning, and I don't want to be caught on these slopes if it starts raining." Eliza hesitated, then nodded. "You're right. I know a spot about a half-mile ahead, a small cave in the bluff. It'll give us shelter if it rains." We continued on, the path growing steeper and more treacherous. The wind had picked up, sending dry leaves swirling around our feet, carrying with it the scent of impending rain and something else. Something musty and animal-like. As promised, about 30 minutes later we reached a sandstone bluff with a shallow cave carved into its base. It was more of an overhang than a true cave, but deep enough to provide shelter from the rain that had just begun to fall in fat, cold drops. "Home sweet home," Eliza said, shrugging off her pack. "At least for tonight." I followed suit, relieved to have solid rock at our backs rather than the increasingly oppressive forest. We set up a minimal camp, sleeping bags but no tents, since we had the cave's protection. I managed to get a small fire going just inside the cave's mouth, using the driest wood I could find. As the daylight faded with unnatural quickness, I found myself studying Eliza in the flickering firelight. Something about her had begun to nag at me. Little inconsistencies I couldn't quite place. "So," I said eventually, "you mentioned your hiking partner earlier, the one you had a disagreement with. What happened there?" Eliza poked at the fire with a stick, her face half-shadowed. "Oh, that. James wanted to stick to the established trails. I wanted to explore." She shrugged. "He wasn't comfortable with going off trail, so he headed back." "He left you alone in the wilderness over that?" I asked incredulously. "Doesn't sound like much of a partner." "We weren't particularly close," she replied, her tone neutral. "More like acquaintances with a shared hobby." "Still," I pressed, "that seems irresponsible. Dangerous, even." She looked up at me then, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "I've been hiking these woods for years, Marcus. I can take care of myself." "I'm sure you can," I said. "I just find it odd that someone would abandon their hiking companion over a disagreement about the route." People make poor decisions sometimes, she said softly, especially when they're afraid. Outside, the rain had intensified, drumming against the ground and hissing as it hit the edges of our small fire. The temperature had dropped significantly, and I pulled my jacket tighter around me. "I'm going to check if I can get any signal," I said, pulling out my phone and portable charger. "Maybe get a weather update." Eliza nodded absently, still staring into the flames. I connected my phone to the power bank and waited for it to boot up. To my surprise, it came to life immediately, showing a nearly full battery. I frowned, certain it had been completely dead earlier. There was no cell service, as expected, but I opened my photo gallery out of habit, scrolling through the digital memories that had become both comfort and torment. Pictures of Elena, healthy and laughing. Elena and me on our honeymoon in Costa Rica. Elena in the garden she'd loved so much. I paused on a group photo taken about 8 months ago, before her diagnosis. It was from a hiking trip to Montesano State Park, an easy day hike with friends. Elena was at the center, her arm around my waist, surrounded by our small group of outdoor enthusiasts. And there, standing at the edge of the group, was a woman who looked remarkably like Eliza. I zoomed in, my heart beginning to race. The woman in the photo had the same athletic build, the same dark ponytail. She was turned slightly away from the camera, her face in three-quarter profile, but the resemblance was undeniable. How had I not recognized her? Had she recognized me? If so, why hadn't she said anything? I looked up to find Eliza watching me, her head tilted at that now familiar angle. "Everything okay?" she asked. I hesitated, then turned my phone to show her the photo. "Were you at Montesano last March, with the Birmingham Hiking Club?" She leaned forward to look, then shook her head. "No, I don't think so. I generally hike solo or with friends from Huntsville." "The woman on the left looks exactly like you," I insisted. Eliza squinted at the image, then smiled slightly. "I guess there's a bit of a resemblance. But no, that's not me." I wasn't convinced, but I didn't press the issue. Instead, I scrolled through more recent photos, stopping at one from June. One of the last pictures of Elena before the cancer had really taken hold. We were at a coffee shop, her favorite local place in 5 Points. She was smiling, though I could see now the faint hollowness in her cheeks that I'd missed at the time. And there, blurred but visible in the background, sitting at a table by the window, was someone who looked remarkably like Eliza. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I quickly scrolled through more photos, paying attention to the backgrounds now. 3 more times I spotted her, or someone who looked like her, in the peripheral edges of my life. At the farmer's market where Elena had insisted on going even as she weakened. In the hospital waiting room, supposedly absorbed in a magazine. On the street, outside our apartment building, walking a dog. I looked up slowly, my mouth dry. Eliza was still watching me, her expression curious but with an undercurrent of something else, something calculating. "Who are you?" I asked quietly. "I told you," she replied, her voice perfectly calm. "Eliza Mercer, environmental scientist, hiker. And why do you keep showing up in the background of my life?" She blinked, her expression unchanged. "I think you might be confused, Marcus. This is the first time we've met." "No," I said, turning my phone to show her the coffee shop photo. "That's you. And here." I swiped to the farmer's market photo. "And here. And in the hospital where my wife was dying." For a long moment, there was only the sound of rain and the crackle of our small fire. Then Eliza smiled, and something in the curve of her lips made my skin crawl. "Grief does strange things to perception," she said gently. "Sometimes we see patterns that aren't there." "Don't," I said, my voice hardening. "Don't try to make this about my mental state. I know what I'm seeing." She sighed, the firelight dancing across her features. "What exactly are you accusing me of, Marcus? Following you? Stalking you and your late wife? To what end?" She had a point, and that momentarily silenced me. What possible reason could this stranger have for inserting herself into the periphery of my life over a period of months? It didn't make sense. Unless… "Old Mother Crow," I said quietly. "You've been watching me, hunting me." Eliza laughed, the sound echoing strangely in our small shelter. "Now you're really reaching. I tell you an old folk tale and suddenly I'm some kind of supernatural predator. Listen to yourself." I stood up suddenly, nearly hitting my head on the low ceiling of the cave. "I need some air." "In this rain?" she asked, gesturing to the downpour outside. "You'll be soaked in seconds." She was right, of course. The rational part of my brain, the part that had gotten me through Elena's illness and death without completely falling apart, knew that I was behaving irrationally. The isolation, the grief, the strange occurrences of the past 2 days, they were all combining to make me paranoid. "I'm sorry," I said, sitting back down. "You're right. I'm not thinking clearly." Eliza's expression softened. "It's okay. The wilderness can play tricks on your mind, especially when you're already carrying a heavy emotional load." I nodded, looking away from her penetrating gaze and into the fire. "My wife died 3 months ago. Cancer. It was bad at the end." "I'm so sorry," she said, and she sounded sincere. "That's an unimaginable loss." "I came out here to get away from everything that reminded me of her," I continued, not sure why I was suddenly sharing this with someone I was half convinced wasn't human. "But I'm finding that's impossible." "Because she's part of you now," Eliza said softly. "Her absence is as much a presence as she was." I looked up, struck by the accuracy of her words. "Yes," I agreed, "exactly that." She smiled, and for a moment I felt a genuine connection with her, a shared understanding that transcended my earlier suspicions. Then she reached into her pack and pulled out a small notebook. "I like to write when I'm processing difficult emotions," she said, handing it to me. "Maybe it would help you too." I accepted the notebook, oddly touched by the gesture. It was a simple moleskin, its black cover worn at the edges. I opened it, intending to thank her for the blank pages where I could begin to exorcise some of the grief I'd been carrying. But the pages weren't blank. They were filled with neat, precise handwriting, and as I scanned the first page, my blood ran cold. Subject: Marcus Reeves. Age: 33. Occupation: software developer. Spouse: Elena Reeves. Deceased: lung cancer, July 2024. I flipped to the next page, my hands shaken. Subject exhibits classic signs of complicated grief: isolation, disrupted sleep patterns, weight loss, vulnerability index 9 to 10. Ideal candidate for transformation. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Eliza didn't answer. When I looked up, she was gone, vanished from her spot by the fire as if she'd never been there. Her backpack remained, leaning against the cave wall. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding. "Eliza!" No answer but the continuous drumming of rain. I turned back to the notebook, flipping through more pages with growing horror. Detailed observations of my daily routines, notes on my emotional state, transcriptions of private conversations I'd had with Elena in our home, photographs of me sleeping in my bed, unaware of being watched. The last entry was dated 2 days ago. Preparation complete. Wilderness isolation protocol initiated. Subject has performed as expected, seeking solitude in Sipsey Wilderness. First contact scheduled for dusk on day 2. Transformation process can begin once subject reaches Eagle Creek Junction. I dropped the notebook as if it had burned me, frantically searching for my phone. It was gone from where I'd placed it moments ago. So was my backpack. The only things remaining in the cave were the guttering fire and Eliza's pack. Fighting rising panic, I lunged for her backpack, tearing it open. Inside was nothing but bundles of those small white flowers I'd seen throughout our journey, tied with what looked like human hair. A sudden sound from outside the cave made me freeze. A low, rhythmic clicking, like bones being struck together. Then a voice, Eliza's, but somehow wrong, as if multiple voices were speaking in unison. "Marcus," it called, drawing out each syllable. "Why don't you come out? It's time." I pressed myself against the back wall of the cave, frantically searching for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. My hand closed around a sharp stone. Not much, but better than nothing. "I know you've seen my notes," the voice continued, closer now. "You understand what's happening, don't you? You've been chosen, Marcus, just as Elena was chosen." "Stay away from me," I shouted, my voice breaking. "And don't you dare say her name." A figure appeared at the mouth of the cave, silhouetted against the night. It had Eliza's shape, but it moved wrong. Too fluid, joints bending in impossible ways. "But she's part of me now," it said, and the voice was exactly Elena's. "Just as you will be." The thing stepped into the firelight, and I saw that it wore Eliza's face like an ill-fitting mask. The skin around the edges rippled slightly as if struggling to maintain its shape. Behind the human features, I caught glimpses of something else, something with too many eyes and a mouth that split its face vertically. "What are you?" I whispered. "I've had many names," it replied, Elena's voice giving way to the multi-toned chorus again. "Old Mother Crow is what they call me now. Before that, it was the Taker. Before that, names lost to time." It took another step toward me. "I'm what waits in the spaces between your world and others. I'm what watches from the dark places." I gripped my stone tighter, pressing my back against the cave wall. "What do you want from me?" "Company," it said simply. "I get so lonely in these woods. I need new faces to wear, new voices to speak with." It gestured at its current form. "Eliza has served me well, but her memories grow thin, and this skin is beginning to deteriorate." Eliza was real. "A real person?" I asked, trying to keep it talking while I desperately searched for an escape route. "Oh yes," it nodded. "A lovely environmental scientist from Huntsville. She came to study the old-growth forest 3 years ago. She didn't believe the stories either." It smiled, the expression grotesque on its slipping features. "She fought, much harder than her friend James, though. Such spirit." "And my wife?" I asked, my voice breaking. Was her illness?" "Cancer is cancer," it replied almost gently. "I didn't cause her disease. I simply observed, learned her, tasted her grief and yours. Grief makes the taking easier." It took another step forward. "And now it's time for you to give yourself to me, Marcus, to become part of something ancient and eternal." As it approached, its form seemed to ripple and expand, the human shape giving way to something much larger and more amorphous. Limbs stretched and multiplied, the skin darkening to the color of wet bark. In that moment, my paralyzing fear gave way to a sudden, incandescent rage. This thing had watched Elena die, had been there in the background of our suffering, feeding on our pain like some psychic vampire, and now it wanted to consume me too. Without conscious thought, I lunged forward, the sharp stone gripped in my hand. I aimed for what still looked vaguely like a face in the shifting mass of its form, driving the jagged stone deep into whatever passed for flesh in the creature's body. A scream erupted from it, an inhuman sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once, high-pitched and guttural simultaneously. The thing recoiled, black fluid spurting from the wound, sizzling where it hit the cave floor. Seizing the momentary advantage, I lunged past it toward the cave entrance, plunging into the cold rain and darkness beyond. Behind me, I heard the creature's rage, felt it in the sudden gusting of wind that nearly knocked me off my feet. "You cannot escape me," it howled in that terrible chorus of voices. "These are my woods." I ran blindly through the downpour, slipping on wet leaves and mud, crashing through underbrush with no concern for direction or trail. My only thought was to put distance between myself and the abomination that called itself Old Mother Crow. Lightning split the sky, briefly illuminating the forest around me. In that frozen moment of harsh light, I saw them. Dozens of small animal corpses hanging from the branches of surrounding trees, each positioned in a grotesque parody of human posture. The sight nearly stopped my heart, but the sound of pursuit galvanized me forward. I don't know how long I ran, minutes or hours. Time had lost all meaning. My lungs burned, my legs threatened to give out, but terror kept me moving. Eventually, I stumbled upon what seemed to be a man-made structure, the remains of an old hunting cabin, its roof partially collapsed, its door hanging from a single rusted hinge. I ducked inside, pressing myself into the darkest corner, trying to control my ragged breathing. Rain dripped through holes in the roof, creating small puddles on the rotting wooden floor. The cabin smelled of decay and something else, something chemical and sharp. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I made out crude symbols painted on the walls, similar to those I'd seen in the stone circles, but larger, more elaborate. They seemed to pulse slightly in the gloom, though that might have been a trick of my exhausted mind. In the center of the cabin's single room was a table, its surface covered with what looked like journals and loose papers. Cautiously I approached, desperately hoping to find something, anything that might help me understand what I was facing, how to escape it. The journals were leather-bound and ancient, their pages yellow with age. They appeared to be records kept by previous victims of Old Mother Crow, hikers, hunters, local residents who had ventured too deep into the hollows. Each documented their encounters with increasing terror and deteriorating handwriting as the entity stalked them, played with them, and eventually consumed them. The most recent journal belonged to someone named David Mercer, presumably the real Eliza's father or brother. His final entry was dated just 3 weeks ago. I know now that I cannot escape. It wears Eliza's skin, but it is not her. God forgive me, I led it straight to Marcus, showed it his picture when it asked about Elena's friends. I didn't understand then what it wanted. If anyone finds this, warn him. Tell him to stay away from Sipsy. It wants him next. My blood froze. This wasn't random. I had been deliberately targeted, drawn here as part of some elaborate supernatural hunt. A sudden noise outside made me drop the journal. Something was circling the cabin, something large that moved with a shuffle-thump rhythm like a wounded predator. Marcus, came that awful multi-voice again, now seeming to emanate from all around the cabin. I can smell your fear, your grief, so sweet, so potent. I pressed back against the wall, frantically searching for a weapon, an escape route, anything. My hand brushed against a shelf holding several dusty glass bottles. Squinting in the darkness, I realized they were old camping fuel containers, white gas for stoves, some still partially full based on the weight when I lifted one. An idea formed, desperate, probably suicidal, but better than waiting to be taken. The creature was still circling, occasionally scraping against the exterior walls, testing for weaknesses. I unscrewed the cap on one of the fuel bottles and began quickly splashing the liquid around the cabin's interior, soaking the walls and floor, being careful to leave a path to the door clear. I know what you're doing, the voice crooned from outside. The others tried similar tactics. Fire, weapons, prayer. Nothing works against me, little man. I am ancient beyond your comprehension. Maybe, I called back, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. But even ancient things can burn. I pulled out my cigarette lighter, a gift from Elena on our first anniversary, though I'd quit smoking years ago. I still carried it everywhere, a tangible connection to her. The thing laughed, a horrible sound like breaking glass and snapping bones. You'll burn with me, then. Is that your plan? To join your precious Elena in death? Its mockery hardened my resolve. I flicked the lighter, the small flame dancing in the darkness. No, I answered, I'm not ready to die, but I'm more than ready to hurt you. I touched the flame to a fuel-soaked section of wall and it caught immediately. Fire raced along the path I'd created, climbing the walls with supernatural speed. The ancient wood, dried by decades of exposure, burned like tinder. The creature shrieked as the flames spread, its cries now sounding more like pain than rage. I heard it thrashing outside, battering against the walls as if trying to reach me before the fire consumed everything. I waited until the last possible moment before making my move. The roof was now fully engulfed, sending burning debris raining down. Smoke filled my lungs, making each breath a battle. Through streaming eyes, I could see my escape path narrowing as the flames closed in. Now or never. I lunged for the door, throwing myself through it and into the rain-soaked night. I rolled down a small embankment, coming to rest in a puddle of mud and water. Behind me, the cabin was a roaring inferno, illuminating the surrounding forest with hellish light. And there, silhouetted against the flames, was the true form of Old Mother Crow. It no longer bothered maintaining human appearance. What stood before me was a nightmare amalgamation, a central mass of twisted, bark-like flesh from which sprouted too many limbs, some human-like, others more like gnarled branches or animal legs. Its face was a vertical split in the central mass, lined with mismatched teeth from countless victims. Multiple eyes of different colors and sizes were scattered across its form, all fixed on me with undisguised hatred. Parts of it were burning, the flames consuming what might have been a wing or clawed arm. It screamed again, the sound so primal and filled with rage that I felt it in my bones. I scrambled to my feet and ran once more, pelting through the forest with renewed terror. Behind me, I heard the crash of the burning cabin collapsing, followed by an eerie silence. Had the fire trapped it? Injured it? I couldn't be sure, and I wasn't about to stop and find out. I ran until my legs finally gave out, sending me tumbling down a steep incline toward the sound of rushing water. I landed hard on a rocky bank beside what I guessed was Thompson Creek again, or perhaps Eagle Creek. I had long since lost all sense of direction. Pain lanced through my left leg as I tried to stand. Looking down, I saw a deep gash running from knee to ankle, blood flowing freely. I must have caught it on a sharp rock or branch during my fall. Gritting my teeth, I tore strips from my shirt to bind the wound as best I could. The rain had finally stopped, and the clouds were beginning to break up, allowing faint moonlight to filter through. By its weak illumination, I could see that I was in a deep gorge, sheer rock walls rising on either side. The creek here was fast-moving, white water crashing over boulders. No easy way to cross. I had two choices: follow the creek downstream, hoping it would lead to civilization eventually, or try to climb one of the gorge walls in search of a trail. With my injured leg, climbing seemed impossible. Downstream it was. I limped along the rocky bank, using fallen branches as makeshift walking sticks. Each step was agony, but fear kept me moving. I had no idea if the fire had actually harmed the creature or merely delayed it. I wasn't about to wait around to find out. As I stumbled along, I became aware of a low, pulsing sound, almost subliminal at first, gradually growing more distinct. It reminded me of a heartbeat, but slower, deeper, as if the earth itself were alive and I was traveling through its veins. The gorge began to widen, the creek spreading out into a series of interconnected pools. Strange, luminescent fungi grew along the water's edge, casting an eerie blue-green glow over everything. The air here felt different, heavier, charged with something I couldn't name. I reached a point where the creek disappeared underground, flowing into a dark opening at the base of the cliff face, a natural tunnel or cave system. The pulsing sound emanated from within, growing stronger as I approached. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to find another way. But the cliff walls had closed in again, leaving no path forward except through the tunnel, and going back meant potentially facing Old Mother Crow again. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the tunnel, the cool darkness enveloping me. The luminescent fungi continued inside, providing just enough light to avoid walking directly into the walls. The ceiling was low, forcing me to stoop as I followed the underground stream. The pulsing grew louder, more insistent. It no longer sounded like a heartbeat, but more like a word being repeated. A name, perhaps in some language too ancient for human comprehension. The tunnel eventually opened into a vast underground chamber, so large that the light from the fungi couldn't reach its boundaries. The stream flowed into a perfectly circular pool at the chamber's center, its surface black and still as glass despite the inflowing water. And there, suspended above the pool, was what I can only describe as a tear in reality. A vertical split in the air itself, edges ragged like a wound, revealing nothing but absolute darkness beyond. The pulsing sound came from this rift, each beat causing it to widen slightly before contracting again. I froze at the chamber's entrance, understanding instinctively that I was witnessing something humans were not meant to see. The source of Old Mother Crow's power, perhaps, or a doorway to whatever realm had spawned it. Beautiful, isn't it? The voice came from behind me, soft and achingly familiar. I turned slowly, already knowing what I would see. Elena stood there, exactly as she had been before the cancer, healthy, vibrant, her dark hair falling around her shoulders in the way I'd always loved. But her eyes were wrong. Too dark, too knowing. "You're not her," I said, my voice breaking despite my certainty. "No," it agreed, using Elena's gentle tone. "But I could be. I could give her back to you, Marcus. A perfect replica, down to the smallest detail." It stepped closer, extending Elena's hand toward me. "Every memory, every mannerism, every private moment you shared, I've watched it all. I can recreate her exactly as she was." "Why?" I asked, taking an involuntary step back. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I need you," it said simply. "Your grief has shaped you into something resonant, compatible. I've been alone for so long. Marcus, wearing borrowed skins that never truly fit. But you could be different. We could merge completely, become something new together." "And if I refuse?" Elena's face twisted into something inhuman for a brief second before settling back into her familiar features. "Then I'll take you anyway, piece by painful piece, and you'll join my collection of partial consciousnesses, screaming fragments trapped in eternal darkness." As it spoke, I became aware of whispers emanating from the rift behind me. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of voices begging, pleading, warning. The souls of previous victims. I realized with growing horror. I glanced around desperately for an escape route, a weapon, anything. My gaze fell on the still black pool. Something about it called to me, suggested a possibility. "You can't win," the thing wearing Elena's form said, reading my thoughts. "Even if you destroy this body, I'll find another. I've existed in these woods for centuries. I'll exist for centuries more." "Maybe," I conceded, shifting my weight subtly, "but not with me inside you." Before it could react, I dove into the black pool. The moment I broke the surface, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. This was no ordinary water. It was cold beyond imagining. Cold that burned like fire, cold that seemed to freeze my very thoughts. Yet I could breathe within it, which was somehow more terrifying than drowning would have been. I sank rapidly, the surface receding above me like a diminishing star. Around me, I sensed rather than saw vast shapes moving in the darkness, ancient things that had never known light, never known air or sky or human touch. And deep below, something waited, something vast and patient that made Old Mother Crow seem like a mewling infant by comparison. I understood now. The pool was another gateway, another rift between worlds, and I was heading straight toward whatever lay at its heart. Panic gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. I fought against the pull, clawing my way back toward the surface with desperate, burning lungs and muscles screaming in protest. Above me, silhouetted against the faint light of the pool's surface, I saw Elena's form dive in after me, moving with inhuman speed. But as it descended, the water seemed to affect it differently than it had me. Its borrowed shape began to dissolve, revealing the true horror beneath. The thing I'd glimpsed outside the burning cabin, but now fully visible in all its grotesque detail. It reached for me with too many limbs, its vertical mouth opening wider than should be possible, revealing rows upon rows of mismatched teeth. But I was already moving upward, breaking the surface with a desperate gasp that felt like my first breath in centuries. I dragged myself onto the rocky edge of the pool, retching black water that moved on its own, trying to flow back into the pool until I frantically wiped it away. Behind me, the surface of the water churned violently as Old Mother Crow fought against whatever had taken hold of it below. A hand, human-looking but elongated, fingers too numerous and joints too flexible, broke the surface, clawing at the edge. I stumbled back as more of the creature emerged, no longer bothering with Elena's appearance. It was injured, parts of its body missing or transformed into something even less recognizable than before. The black water seemed to be dissolving it, reconfiguring it against its will. "You!" it shrieked, its voice now a cacophony of all its victims speaking at once. "What have you done?" I didn't have an answer. I had acted on instinct alone, with no plan beyond escaping its grasp. The thing hauled itself partially out of the pool, dragging a distorted mass of limbs and tissue across the stone. But something was holding it back, tendrils of absolute darkness rising from the water, wrapping around what passed for its torso, pulling it slowly back toward the depths. "This isn't over," it hissed, its form collapsing further as the tendrils tightened. "I'll find you again. I'll wear your skin yet." Something in its tone, pure hatred mixed with genuine fear, gave me courage. I stepped forward, looking directly into its many mismatched eyes. "No," I said firmly, "you won't, because I'm going to make sure everyone knows about you, about this place. No more solitary hikers for you to pick off, no more isolated victims. Your hunting grounds are going to become very, very public." It screamed again as more tendrils emerged, wrapping around what might have been a neck or a central mass. "You can't prove anything. You'll sound insane." "Maybe," I acknowledged, "but I'll be believed enough. Enough for people to come looking. Enough for this place to be found." The realization of what that meant showed in its eyes. The end of centuries of isolated hunting, of unchallenged dominion over the hollows. It lunged forward in one last desperate attempt to reach me, but the darkness pulled it back inexorably, dragging it beneath the surface with a final, otherworldly howl that echoed through the chamber long after it had disappeared. I stood there, shaking, waiting to see if it would emerge again. Minutes passed, then an hour. The pool's surface remained undisturbed. The pulsing sound from the rift had stopped. The luminescent fungi seemed dimmer now, their glow fading gradually. Eventually, I forced myself to move, to find my way back through the tunnel and into the open air. Dawn was breaking as I emerged, painting the gorge in soft pink light that seemed impossibly benign after the horrors of the night. I followed the creek downstream, my injured leg a constant reminder that everything had been real. Around mid-morning, I encountered a group of day hikers who, alarmed by my appearance and obvious distress, helped me reach a ranger station. I told a sanitized version of events, getting lost, falling, spending a terrifying night in the wilderness, that explained my physical condition without making me sound delusional. The rescue team found no sign of Eliza Mercer or her belongings, no burned-out cabin, no cave with strange symbols. They attributed my more confused statements to dehydration and trauma. I didn't argue. That was 2 weeks ago. I'm back in Birmingham now, my leg healing slowly. On the surface, I've returned to my normal life, therapy sessions, grief support group, occasional social interactions with concerned friends. But everything has changed. I've been researching Old Mother Crow, digging through local folklore archives, connecting with historians specializing in Appalachian and Southern mythology. The entity appears in stories dating back to the earliest European settlements in the area and in Native American legends long before that, albeit under different names. More disturbingly, I found records of disappearances in the Sipsey wilderness dating back decades. Hikers, campers, and locals who entered the hollows and never returned. Too many to be coincidence. Too many to be explained by natural causes. I've started a blog documenting everything I've learned. I've organized hiking groups specifically targeting the hollows area, ensuring no one ever ventures there alone again. The park rangers think I'm eccentric but harmless, just another outdoor enthusiast with an unusual fixation on a particular area. They don't know that every night I dream of black water and ancient things moving in darkness, that sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I catch a glimpse of something else looking back at me. Something with too many eyes and a vertical smile. And they don't know that twice now. I've woken to find small white flowers on my doorstep, arranged in a perfect circle. Old Mother Crow might be wounded. She might be weakened. But I know, with bone-deep certainty, that she isn't gone, and she remembers her promises. So I keep my doors locked. I sleep with the lights on. And I wait, knowing that sooner or later I'll hear that familiar voice again, that soft, multi-toned whisper calling my name from the darkness. Because some things, once they've chosen you, never let go. My name is Elijah Reynolds. I'm 34 years old. This happened in October 2024 during what was supposed to be a relaxing weekend in the Sipsey wilderness in Alabama. I still wake up screaming some nights. My therapist suggested I write it all down, every horrific detail, as a way to process what happened in those woods. Maybe then the nightmares will stop. Maybe then I'll stop seeing Marcus's face. It was supposed to be a simple 4-day hiking trip, just me and my 3 colleagues from Huntsville Tech Solutions looking to decompress after finishing a major project. We'd been working 16-hour days for months, and our boss practically ordered us to take some time off before our next assignment. Marcus Chen suggested the Sipsey Wilderness in the Bankhead National Forest. Said his cousin had hiked there last spring and couldn't stop talking about the waterfalls and sandstone cliffs. The 4 of us had worked together for nearly 3 years, but had never spent much time together outside of the office. Marcus was our lead developer, brilliant, meticulous, and perpetually caffeinated. Then there was Danielle Porter, our project manager, efficient, no nonsense, with a dry wit that kept us sane during deadlines. Nathan Blackwood was our security specialist, former military, though not technically a veteran as he'd been discharged during basic training due to a previously undiagnosed heart condition, quiet but fiercely loyal. And me? I was the UI designer with a penchant for overthinking everything. None of us were experienced hikers, but the trails in Sipsey were supposedly well marked, and we'd planned a route that wasn't too demanding. We packed light but prepared. Tents, sleeping bags, first aid kits, water purification tablets, and enough food for 5 days just to be safe. Marcus brought his fancy GPS device along with physical maps of the area. The drive from Huntsville took about an hour and a half. We left our cars at the Thompson Creek Trailhead parking lot, shouldered our packs, and headed into the forest around noon on Thursday. The weather was perfect. Crisp autumn air, leaves in full color, sunlight filtering through the canopy in golden shafts. "Anyone else feel like they've walked into a Bob Ross painting?" Danielle asked as we crossed a small stream, the water clear as glass over smooth pebbles. "Happy little trees," Nathan mimicked in his best Bob Ross voice, and we all laughed. That first day was idyllic. We hiked about 6 miles along Thompson Creek, marveling at the towering hemlocks and hardwoods, some estimated to be over 500 years old. We set up camp on a flat area near the creek, far enough from the water to be safe but close enough to hear its gentle burbling. The problems started that night. We'd gathered around a small campfire, roasting marshmallows and passing around a flask of whiskey Nathan had brought along. The conversation had turned from work to personal lives, something we rarely discussed at the office. "I still can't believe you're engaged." "Danielle," Marcus said, poking at the fire with a stick. "I've never even seen you on a date." Danielle rolled her eyes. "That's because I don't mix my work life with my personal life. But yes, the wedding's in May. You're all invited, by the way." "What about you, Elijah?" Nathan asked. "Still single?" I nodded, staring into the flames. "Divorced, 3 years now. Not really looking anymore." "That's what everyone says right before they meet someone," Marcus chuckled. The conversation continued, but I found myself distracted by something on the edge of our campsite, a flicker of movement just beyond the circle of firelight. I squinted, trying to make out what it was, but the darkness beyond our camp was absolute. "Did you guys see that?" I asked, pointing. They all turned to look. "See what?" Danielle asked. "I thought I saw something moving over there." Marcus shrugged. "Probably just a raccoon or something." I wasn't convinced, but didn't push it. We turned in shortly after, crawling into our respective tents. Marcus and Nathan sharing one, Danielle and I in separate ones. I woke around 3 a.m. to what sounded like whispers. At first, I thought it was the wind in the trees or the creek nearby, but as I focused, the sounds became more distinct, like multiple voices having a hurried, hushed conversation just outside my tent. I froze, straining to hear what they were saying, but the words were indistinct, almost as if in another language. Cautiously, I unzipped my tent and peered out. The campsite was bathed in silver moonlight, the fire reduced to glowing embers. There was nothing out of the ordinary that I could see. The whispers had stopped the moment I moved. I chalked it up to the remnants of a dream and tried to go back to sleep, but an uneasy feeling had settled over me. The next morning, I mentioned the whispers to the others over breakfast. "I didn't hear anything," Nathan said, boiling water for instant coffee, "but I'm a pretty heavy sleeper." "I heard something," Danielle admitted reluctantly. "It sounded like people talking, but far away." Marcus looked up from his oatmeal. "You know, there are legends about these woods. My cousin mentioned them, but I didn't think much of it." "What kind of legends?" I asked. Marcus shrugged. "Just the usual backwoods stuff. Supposedly there used to be a small settlement deep in the Sipsey wilderness back in the 1800s. Some kind of religious sect that practiced unusual rituals. They all disappeared mysteriously one winter." "That's comforting," Nathan muttered. "It's just stories," Marcus assured us. "Probably started because of the wind in the canyons. It can sound eerily like voices sometimes." We packed up camp and continued our hike, following the trail deeper into the wilderness. The plan was to make it to Sipsey Fork by nightfall, where there was supposedly a beautiful camping spot near a waterfall. The trail became more difficult as the day progressed. What had started as a well-marked path gradually became overgrown and harder to follow. Twice we had to backtrack after realizing we'd wandered off the trail. By mid-afternoon, a heavy fog had rolled in, reducing visibility to about 20 feet. "This isn't right," Marcus said, checking his GPS. "According to this, we should be heading west, but the trail keeps curving north." "Maybe we should make camp early and wait for the fog to clear," Danielle suggested, looking nervously at the darkening sky. "No, we're close," Marcus insisted. "The GPS says Sipsey Fork is just half a mile ahead." We pressed on, but the fog only grew thicker. The temperature dropped rapidly, and an unnatural silence descended on the forest. No birds calling, no insects buzzing, just the sound of our footsteps on the damp ground and our increasingly labored breathing as we climbed a steep incline that wasn't on any of our maps. We finally reached the top of the ridge and found ourselves looking down into a narrow valley. Through breaks in the fog, we could make out what appeared to be ruins. Stone foundations, crumbling walls, the remnants of what might once have been a small village. "That's not on the map," Nathan said, voicing what we were all thinking. Marcus was frowning at his GPS. "And neither is this ridge. This doesn't make any sense. According to this, we're still on the main trail, but..." "We're lost," Danielle said flatly. Admit it, Marcus. We're not lost, he insisted. The GPS says, To hell with your GPS, Danielle snapped. Look around. Does this look like the trail to you? Before Marcus could respond, a sound drifted up from the ruins below, a slow, melodic humming that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It sounded like a woman's voice, but distorted somehow, as if coming from underwater or very far away. Someone's down there, Nathan whispered. Maybe they can help us, Marcus suggested, already starting down the slope. Wait, I grabbed his arm. Something doesn't feel right about this place. Marcus shook off my hand. Don't be ridiculous. If there's someone down there, they might know how to get back to the main trail. Without waiting for a response, he began picking his way down the steep slope toward the ruins. After a moment's hesitation, Nathan followed. Danielle and I exchanged worried glances. We shouldn't split up, she said softly. I nodded, and reluctantly we followed the others down into the valley. The ruins were more extensive than they had appeared from above. Stone foundations formed a rough circle, with what might have been a larger structure at the center. Everything was covered in thick moss and climbing vines, suggesting these buildings had been abandoned for many decades, if not centuries. The humming had stopped by the time we reached the valley floor. An eerie silence hung over the place, broken only by an occasional gust of wind that seemed to whisper through the empty doorways and windows of the ruined structures. "Hello?" Marcus called out. "Is anyone here?" His voice echoed strangely, seeming to come back to us from multiple directions at once. There was no response. "I don't like this," Nathan muttered, his hand unconsciously moving to where a weapon might be if he'd had one. "Let's find a way back to the trail." "We should check it out first," Marcus argued. "Someone was here. I heard them." "We all heard something," I said, "but it could have been the wind." Marcus wasn't listening. He was already moving toward the central structure, a circular stone foundation with walls that still stood about chest-high in places. As he approached, I noticed something odd about the ground inside the circle. It looked darker, almost as if it had been burned. "Marcus, wait!" I started to call out, but I was interrupted by a sharp cry from Danielle. "My phone!" she exclaimed, pulling it from her pocket. "It just turned on by itself." Indeed, her phone, which should have had no signal this deep in the wilderness, was glowing brightly, the screen flashing with static. Nathan pulled out his own phone and found the same thing happening. So did I. Only Marcus, who had left his phone in his backpack to preserve battery, wasn't affected. The screens flickered rapidly, displaying random images and fragments of text too quickly to read, while an ear-piercing electronic whine emanated from the speakers. Then, as suddenly as it had started, all three phones went completely dead, not just out of battery, but unresponsive, as if they'd been fried. "What the hell was that?" Nathan demanded, staring at his dead phone. But Marcus wasn't paying attention. He had reached the central structure and was standing motionless, staring at something on the ground inside the circle. "Guys," he called, his voice oddly flat. "You need to see this." We approached cautiously. As we drew closer, I could see what had captured Marcus's attention. There was a symbol etched into the blackened earth inside the stone circle. It looked freshly made, the soil disturbed recently. The symbol itself was unlike anything I'd seen before, a complex arrangement of curves and angles that seemed to shift and change if you looked at it too long, making my eyes water and my head ache. "We need to leave," Danielle said firmly. "Right now." Marcus knelt beside the symbol, reaching out as if to touch it. "Don't." Nathan grabbed his shoulder. "Don't touch anything here." Marcus blinked as if coming out of a trance. Right, sorry, it's fascinating, isn't it? Like it's moving, somehow." "It's a trick of the light," I said, though I didn't believe it. There was something fundamentally wrong with that symbol, something that made my stomach turn just looking at it. We backed away from the stone circle, all of us now in agreement that we needed to get away from this place. The fog was growing thicker by the minute, and the light was fading fast. We needed to find somewhere to make camp for the night. "Let's head back up to the ridge," Nathan suggested. "At least we'll have the high ground." We all agreed and started retracing our steps. But the landscape seemed to have changed somehow. The slope we'd descended was now much steeper, the path we'd taken obscured by dense undergrowth that I was certain hadn't been there before. We scrambled upward as best we could, the fog closing in around us, making it impossible to see more than a few feet in any direction. By the time we reached what we thought was the top of the ridge, night had fallen completely. We were exhausted, disoriented, and thoroughly unsettled by our discovery in the ruins. We made camp in a small clearing, too tired to do much more than set up our tents and eat some cold rations before crawling into our sleeping bags. "First light, we find the trail and get out of here," Nathan said as we prepared to turn in. No one disagreed. I don't know what time it was when the whispers started again. Maybe midnight, maybe later. This time they were louder, more insistent, and seemed to be coming from all around us. I could almost make out words now, but in a language I didn't recognize. Guttural and harsh one moment, soothingly melodic the next. I sat up in my tent, heart pounding. Outside I could hear movement, footsteps circling our camp, too many sets to count. I reached for my flashlight, but it wouldn't turn on, even though I'd put fresh batteries in it just before the trip. The whispers grew louder, and now they were accompanied by another sound, a rhythmic tapping or knocking that seemed to be coming from the trees surrounding our campsite. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. It was deliberate, almost like a code. I was about to call out to the others when a scream pierced the night, high-pitched and terrified, unmistakably Danielle's voice. I burst out of my tent to find Nathan and Marcus doing the same. Danielle's tent was empty, her sleeping bag unzipped and rumpled. "Danielle!" Marcus shouted into the darkness. His voice echoed back mockingly. "Danielle! Danielle! Danielle!" The whispers had stopped the moment we emerged from our tents, and now the forest was deathly quiet. Even the tapping had ceased. We called for Danielle repeatedly, searching the immediate area with our cell phone flashlights since none of our regular flashlights would work. "There." Nathan pointed to something at the edge of our clearing, a splash of color against the dark forest floor. It was Danielle's red bandana, the one she'd been wearing earlier. Beyond it, barely visible in the dim light of our phones, was a trail of disturbed leaves and broken twigs, as if something had been dragged into the forest. We followed it cautiously, calling Danielle's name in increasingly desperate voices. The trail led us down a steep slope, through a thicket of thorny bushes that tore at our clothes and skin, and finally to the edge of a small pond that we hadn't noticed before. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the cloud-covered sky like a black mirror, and floating face down in the center of the pond was a figure in a blue jacket, Danielle's jacket. Nathan didn't hesitate. He waded into the water, which came up to his chest at its deepest point, and pulled Danielle to shore. She was unconscious but breathing, her skin ice-cold to the touch. There was a strange mark on her forehead, a simplified version of the symbol we'd seen in the ruins, drawn in what looked like black mud or ash. We carried her back to camp and wrapped her in every spare piece of clothing and blanket we had, trying to warm her up. After what seemed like hours, her eyelids finally fluttered open. "Danielle," Marcus said softly, "can you hear me?" She stared at him blankly for a moment, then slowly nodded. "What happened?" I asked. "Who took you?" Danielle's eyes widened with fear. "Took me? Nobody took me. I went to gather more firewood." We exchanged confused glances. The fire had gone out hours ago, and Danielle had been asleep in her tent when the whispers started. "Danielle," Nathan said gently, "you were in the pond. We found you floating in the water." She shook her head violently. No, I was just gathering wood. For the fire." Her voice had an odd, sing-song quality to it that I'd never heard before. "There's something on your forehead," Marcus said, reaching out to touch the mark. Danielle caught his wrist in a grip so tight that Marcus winced. "Don't touch it," she hissed. Then, as if realizing how strange she was acting, she released him and forced a smile. I mean, it's probably just dirt. I must have fallen. We didn't press the issue. Danielle was clearly in shock, and we were all exhausted and frightened. We agreed to take turns keeping watch for the rest of the night. Nathan volunteered to take the first shift, and Marcus and I returned to our tents, though I doubted any of us would get much sleep. I must have dozed off despite my anxiety because the next thing I knew, sunlight was filtering through the walls of my tent, and I could hear voices outside. Nathan and Marcus talking in low, urgent tones. I quickly dressed and joined them. "What's going on?" I asked. Nathan looked grim. "Danielle's gone again, and so is most of our food." "What? When?" "Must have been during my watch," Marcus admitted, looking ashamed. I think I fell asleep. I don't remember doing it, but I must have." I looked around the campsite. Sure enough, Danielle's tent was empty, and our backpacks had been rifled through, food supplies missing from each. But why would Danielle steal our food? It didn't make any sense. "We need to find her," Nathan said, "and then we need to get the hell out of these woods." We packed up what remained of our supplies and began searching for signs of which way Danielle had gone. It didn't take long to find a trail. Broken branches and disturbed leaf litter leading deeper into the forest, away from the ridge and toward what looked like a deeper valley beyond. We followed the trail for what felt like hours. The forest grew denser, the trees taller and older, blocking much of the sunlight. The ground became increasingly marshy, our boots sinking into soft, wet earth with each step. Strange fungi grew in clusters along the path, purplish-black mushrooms with caps that seemed to pulse slightly, as if breathing. "I've never seen mushrooms like that before," Marcus said, bending to examine one. "Don't touch them," Nathan warned. As we ventured deeper, I began to notice other oddities. Trees with bark that spiraled in unnatural patterns, birds that fell silent as we approached and watched us with two intelligent eyes, shadows that seemed to move independently of anything casting them. The path eventually led us to another clearing, larger than the one where we'd camped. In the center stood an enormous oak tree, its trunk at least 10 feet in diameter, its branches spreading out to form a canopy over the entire space. The tree looked ancient, gnarled, and somehow wrong, its bark too dark, almost black in places, with strange protuberances that resembled faces in various expressions of agony. And tied to the trunk of this monstrous tree was Danielle. She appeared unconscious, her head lolling forward, her wrists and ankles bound to the tree with what looked like braided vines. Her clothing was torn and dirty, and the mark on her forehead was now larger, covering most of her face in intricate, swirling patterns of black. We rushed forward, but before we could reach her, a figure stepped out from behind the tree. A woman, tall and unnaturally thin, with long gray hair that hung in matted tangles around a face that might once have been beautiful, but was now a mask of cruelty. She wore a tattered dress that might have been white originally but was now stained with dirt, moss, and what looked disturbingly like dried blood. "You shouldn't have come here," the woman said, her voice the same melodic humming we'd heard in the ruins. "This is a sacred place, a place of power." "Let her go," Nathan demanded, taking a step forward. The woman smiled, revealing teeth that had been filed to points. "She's ours now. She was marked. She accepted our invitation." "What are you talking about?" Marcus asked. "Who are you?" "I am Magdalena Blackwood," the woman said, performing a mocking curtsy. "Last living descendant of the Blackwood Covenant. And this," she gestured to the massive tree, "is our god, the devourer in the wood, the one who waits between the roots." Nathan had gone very pale. "Did you say Blackwood?" The woman's gaze fixed on him, her eyes widening with interest. "Ah, a kinsman. I can see it now. The same eyes, the same jawline. Blood calls to blood, child. That's why you were drawn here. Why you all were. The devourer has been waiting for new blood, fresh sacrifices." "This is insane," I muttered. "We need to get Danielle and get out of here." "You're not going anywhere," Magdalena said, her voice hardening. "None of you are. The ceremony has already begun." As if on cue, whispers erupted from the forest around us, the same whispers we'd been hearing since our first night. But now, figures emerged from between the trees. Gaunt men and women in tattered clothing similar to Magdalena's, their faces marked with the same black symbols, their eyes hollow and hungry. They began to advance on us slowly, forming a circle that tightened with each step. I counted at least 15 of them. We backed up until we were standing just in front of the great tree beside Danielle, who was still unconscious. "Nathan," Marcus whispered urgently, "do you know this woman? Is she really your relative?" Nathan shook his head, looking bewildered. "I don't know. My father always said our family originally came from Alabama, but he never mentioned any cult." "You are of the blood," Magdalena insisted, approaching us while her followers maintained their circle. "You belong here, Nathan Blackwood, with your true family." "These are my family," Nathan said firmly, gesturing to Marcus and me. "And Danielle. Now let her go." Magdalena's eyes narrowed. "The girl stays. She's been chosen. As for the rest of you—" She considered for a moment. "Perhaps we can come to an arrangement. We need new blood, but it needn't be all of you. Give us one volunteer and the others may leave." "That's not happening," I said immediately. But Marcus had gone very quiet, his gaze fixed on Danielle. "What exactly would this volunteer have to do?" he asked slowly. "Marcus," Nathan hissed, "what are you doing?" "Just asking," Marcus replied, not taking his eyes off Magdalena. She smiled her terrible pointed smile. They would join us, become one with the covenant, learn our ways, partake in our ceremonies. She ran a finger along the black markings on her own face. "Accept the blessing of the devourer." "And the others would be free to go?" Marcus pressed. "Unharmed?" "Upon my blood oath," Magdalena said solemnly, drawing a sharp fingernail across her palm, leaving a line of dark blood. "Don't listen to her," I urged. "She's clearly insane. We need to grab Danielle and run." "Run where?" Marcus asked, finally turning to look at me. "We're lost in the middle of nowhere. Our phones don't work. We have no food left, and we're outnumbered." He gestured to the circle of hollow-eyed followers surrounding us. "So, you're just going to volunteer to join some backwoods cult?" Nathan demanded incredulously. Marcus looked at Danielle, then back at us. His expression had changed, become calculating in a way I'd never seen before. "One of us has to stay," he said quietly. "And it should be me." Before we could stop him, he stepped forward and addressed Magdalena. "I volunteer. Let my friends go, and I'll stay." Magdalena studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well. Cut the girl down," she ordered her followers. "These 3 may leave. This one," she placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, "remains with us." 2 of the gaunt figures moved forward and used crude knives to cut through the vines binding Danielle to the tree. She slumped forward, and Nathan caught her before she could hit the ground. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion and fear evident in her gaze. "What's happening?" she murmured. "Where am I?" "We're leaving," Nathan told her firmly, supporting her weight. "Can you walk?" She nodded weakly, and with my help, she managed to stand on shaky legs. The black markings on her face seemed to be fading already, reducing to just the small symbol on her forehead. "Marcus," I said, turning to my colleague, "don't do this. We'll find another way out." Marcus smiled sadly. "It's the only way, Elijah. Get them to safety. Get help if you can. But don't come back for me. The path is open to you," Magdalena announced, gesturing toward a narrow trail leading away from the clearing that I could have sworn wasn't there a moment ago. "Follow it, and you will find your way back to where mortal paths cross. But remember, speak of what you've seen here, and the Devourer's curse will find you wherever you hide." Nathan helped Danielle onto the path, and I reluctantly followed, looking back at Marcus one last time. He stood beside Magdalena now, her hand still on his shoulder, watching us leave with an expression I couldn't quite read. Part fear, part resignation, and something else. Something that looked almost like anticipation? The cultists parted to let us pass, their hollow eyes following our every move. As soon as we were on the path, they closed ranks behind us, cutting off any chance of going back for Marcus. The last thing I saw before the trees obscured the clearing was Magdalena leading Marcus toward the great black tree, its trunk seeming to open like a mouth to receive them. We followed the path in silence, Danielle leaning heavily on Nathan for support. The forest around us gradually became less oppressive, the trees more normal, the ground firmer. After about an hour of walking, we emerged onto a familiar trail, the main path we'd been following before we got lost. From there, it took us another 4 hours to reach the trailhead where we'd left our cars. By the time we arrived, Danielle had regained most of her strength, though the mark on her forehead remained, fainter but still visible. We were all exhausted, filthy, and deeply shaken by what we'd experienced. "What do we do now?" Nathan asked as we stood beside our vehicles. "Call the police? Tell them Marcus is being held by some cult in the woods?" I looked at Danielle, who had been unusually quiet since we left the clearing. "What do you remember?" I asked her. She shook her head. "Not much. I remember going to sleep in my tent that first night. Then, nothing until waking up tied to that tree." She touched the mark on her forehead gingerly. "What is this? What did they do to me?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but I think we should get you to a hospital, just to be safe." We agreed that Nathan would take Danielle to the nearest emergency room while I went to the ranger station to report Marcus missing. We would meet up afterward to decide what to do next. The ranger was skeptical of my story, especially when I left out the more unbelievable elements. A group of hostile people living in the woods? Possible, she conceded. A cult performing rituals? Less likely, but not impossible. A sentient tree that consumed human sacrifices? That part I kept to myself. She radioed for help, and within hours a search and rescue team was preparing to head into the area I'd described. I offered to go with them, to show them the way, but the head ranger firmly refused. "I was clearly exhausted and in shock," she said. "What I needed was rest and probably medical attention." I gave them my contact information and drove to the hospital where Nathan had taken Danielle. By the time I arrived, Danielle was being examined by doctors, and Nathan was pacing the waiting room, looking even more worried than before. "They can't explain the mark," he told me in a low voice. "They're running tests, but what?" Nathan hesitated. "She's different, Elijah. The way she talks, the way she moves. It's subtle, but it's not our Danielle." I thought about what Magdalena had said about Danielle being chosen and felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean?" Before Nathan could explain, a commotion erupted at the hospital entrance. Paramedics rushed in, wheeling a gurney with a figure strapped to it, a man covered in dirt and blood, thrashing against his restraints and screaming incoherently. It was Marcus. Nathan and I watched in shock as they rushed him past us toward the emergency department. His clothes were in tatters, his body covered in cuts and bruises, and most disturbingly, his eyes were wild, unfocused, filled with a terror that made my blood run cold. A nurse stopped to ask if we were with him when she noticed our hiking clothes and general disheveled state. We explained that we'd been on the same hiking trip, and she told us that a hunter had found Marcus wandering along the road near the Sipsey Wilderness, miles from any trail, in a state of extreme distress. They let us see him briefly once the doctors had sedated him and treated his immediate injuries. He was barely recognizable, his face gaunt, hair matted with blood and something black and tarry, his skin covered in dozens of small, precise cuts that formed patterns similar to the markings we'd seen on the cultists. "Marcus?" I said softly, approaching his bed. "Can you hear me?" His eyes snapped open, focusing on me with sudden clarity. "Elijah," he whispered, "you shouldn't have left me there." "We're going to get you help," I promised. "You're safe now." A terrible smile spread across his face, a smile that reminded me too much of Magdalena's pointed teeth. "No one is safe," he whispered. "It's coming. The devourer. It's coming for all of us." "What happened back there, Marcus?" Nathan asked, standing at the foot of the bed. "How did you escape?" Marcus's smile widened. "Escape? I didn't escape. I was sent. To prepare the way." "Prepare the way for what?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. "For the harvest," Marcus replied, his voice taking on that same eerie sing-song quality I'd heard from Danielle earlier. "The devourer hungers. It needs new vessels. New flesh to wear." A shudder ran through his body, and for a moment, his eyes seemed to roll back in his head. When they focused again, there was a desperate, pleading look in them. A look of the real Marcus, fighting to get through. "Kill me," he begged, his voice suddenly his own again. "Please, Elijah. It's inside me. I can feel it growing, changing me from the inside out. Soon, there won't be anything left of me. Just it." Before I could respond, his body convulsed violently, back arching off the bed despite the restraints. Alarms began to sound as his vital signs went haywire. Medical staff rushed in, pushing Nathan and me out of the room. We waited for hours, watching through the window as doctors and nurses fought to stabilize Marcus. Eventually, a grim-faced doctor came out to speak with us. "I'm sorry," she said. "We did everything we could, but his system was shutting down. Multiple organ failure. It was like he was rotting from the inside out." "What could cause something like that?" Nathan asked, his voice hollow. The doctor shook her head. "I've never seen anything like it. We're ordering an autopsy. Was he exposed to any unusual substances in the woods? Plants, fungi, contaminated water?" We told her what we could, again leaving out the most unbelievable parts. She made notes and promised to contact us when they had more information. As we turned to leave, a nurse approached us. "Are you here with Danielle Porter as well?" she asked. We nodded. "She's asking for you. Room 212. We found Danielle sitting on the edge of her hospital bed, fully dressed and apparently ready to leave. The mark on her forehead was completely gone now, her skin unblemished. She smiled when she saw us, a normal Danielle smile that made some of the tension in my shoulders ease. "The doctors say I'm fine," she announced. "Just dehydration and exposure. They want me to follow up with my regular doctor, but I can go home." "That's great," Nathan said, though he still looked wary. "How do you feel?" "Tired, confused." She frowned. "I still can't remember much of what happened. Was Marcus really found? One of the nurses mentioned it." Nathan and I exchanged glances, silently debating how much to tell her. Before we could decide, Danielle's expression changed, becoming sharper, more focused. "He didn't make it, did he?" she asked softly. I shook my head. "How did you know?" She touched her forehead where the mark had been. "I can still feel it sometimes, like an echo in my mind. The devourer speaks through its chosen ones. Marcus was chosen, just like I was, but he embraced it. I fought it. What exactly is this devourer?" Nathan asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. Danielle's eyes seemed to lose focus for a moment. "It's ancient. It was here before people, before animals, maybe before the earth itself. It sleeps beneath the forest, its roots extending for miles. The Blackwood Covenant has tended to it for generations, feeding it, worshipping it, preparing for the day when it would be strong enough to spread beyond the wilderness." "And that day is coming?" I asked, feeling a chill despite the hospital's warmth. Danielle nodded. They needed new vessels, people to carry pieces of the devourer out into the world. That's what the marking ritual is for. They plant a seed of it inside you, and it grows until there's nothing left of the original person. She looked at us with tears in her eyes. I was fighting it the whole time. I could feel it trying to take over my thoughts, my memories. I think the only reason I managed to resist was that they didn't complete the ritual before you found me. And Marcus? Nathan asked. He gave himself willingly, Danielle said. That makes the process much faster, much more complete. He wasn't Marcus anymore by the time you left that clearing. He was just a shell filled with the Devourer's essence. I thought about Marcus's last moments, that brief window when he seemed to be himself again, begging me to kill him. Perhaps some small part of him had still been fighting, right until the end. We need to tell someone, I said. The police, the FBI, someone who can find these people and stop them before they hurt anyone else. Danielle laughed bitterly. And tell them what? That there's an ancient evil entity living in a tree in the Sipsey wilderness, with a cult of human followers preparing for the end of the world? They'll think we're insane. She had a point. Even the ranger had been skeptical of the toned-down version of our story. Without proof, who would believe the full truth? Then, what do we do? Nathan asked. Danielle was quiet for a moment. We burn it, she said finally. The Devourer, the tree, all of it. Fire is the only thing it truly fears. You want us to go back there? I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. After everything that happened? We have to, Danielle insisted. I can still sense it, still feel its pull. It knows we escaped. It will send the others after us eventually. We'll never be safe unless we destroy it. I looked at Nathan, expecting him to back me up in refusing this insane plan. But to my surprise, he looked thoughtful. She might be right, he said slowly. And besides, they're my family apparently. In some twisted way, I'm connected to all this. I need to end it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You both almost died out there. Marcus did die. And now you want to go back? Not right away, Danielle clarified. We need to prepare, gather supplies, learn more about what we're facing. She looked at Nathan. Your family connection might be the key. If there are records, histories about the Blackwood Covenant. Nathan nodded. I'll see what I can find. My father kept some old family documents in his attic. I never paid much attention to them before. But now, they were both looking at me, waiting for my response. Part of me wanted to walk away, to go home and try to forget everything that had happened in those woods. But another part knew that Danielle was right. We would never be truly safe as long as the Devourer existed, and I couldn't let my friends face it alone. Fine, I sighed, but we do this smart. No rushing in, half prepared. And so began 2 weeks of intensive research and preparation. Nathan discovered old journals and letters in his father's collection that confirmed Magdalena's claims. The Blackwoods had indeed been founders of a religious sect that settled in the Sipsey wilderness in the early 1800s. According to the documents, they had discovered something ancient buried deep in the forest, something that promised power and eternal life to those who served it faithfully. The records were frustratingly vague about the nature of this entity, referring to it only as the Sleeper, or he who dwells beneath. But they detailed rituals and sacrifices that made my stomach turn. The most disturbing part was a family tree that showed the Blackwood line splitting around 1850, some members leaving the covenant while others remained. Nathan's ancestors were from the branch that left, apparently fleeing in the night after some unspecified abomination committed by the remaining cult members. Meanwhile, Danielle's connection to the Devourer, though weakened, gave her insights into the cult's activities. She would sometimes wake from nightmares with new information, the locations of other ruins in the wilderness, the names of high-ranking cult members, fragments of the rituals they performed. She documented everything, creating a detailed map of the area around the massive tree that served as the Devourer's physical anchor to our world. As for me, I focused on the practical aspects of our mission. I acquired camping supplies, navigation equipment, and, most importantly, the materials we would need to burn a very large, very old tree. Gasoline would be our primary accelerant, but I also obtained thermite, which burns hot enough to melt metal and would hopefully be effective against whatever supernatural properties the Devourer's tree possessed. By the time we were ready to return to the Sipsey Wilderness, it was early November. The weather had turned colder, which would make camping more challenging but would also mean fewer regular hikers in the area. We didn't want innocent bystanders getting caught in the crossfire if things went wrong. We told no one where we were going, just that we were taking a weekend trip to process what had happened to Marcus. His death had been ruled due to an unknown toxin, with authorities theorizing that he had ingested some kind of poisonous plant or fungus while lost in the woods. The case remained open but inactive, with no suspects and no leads. We parked at a different trailhead this time, one that Danielle said would lead us more directly to the Devourer's clearing. We were better equipped now: proper hiking boots, weather-appropriate clothing, GPS devices for each of us, though we had no illusions that they would work properly once we got close to the cult's territory, and weapons. Nathan had brought his hunting rifle, and Danielle and I each carried large hunting knives. We weren't planning on hurting any people if we could avoid it, but if the cultists attacked us, we needed to be able to defend ourselves. The hike was arduous, especially with the heavy packs containing our accelerants and other supplies. We moved slowly and cautiously, constantly alert for any sign of the cult members. Danielle led the way, seeming to know instinctively which path to take at each fork in the trail. As we ventured deeper into the wilderness, the familiar disorienting effects began to manifest. Compasses spinning wildly, GPS devices showing impossible locations, the sun seeming to move too quickly or too slowly across the sky. But Danielle appeared unaffected, marching forward with unwavering confidence. "How much farther?" Nathan asked after several hours of hiking. "Not far now," Danielle replied. "Maybe another mile. We should reach the clearing before sunset." I checked my watch, but the hands were spinning randomly, rendering it useless. "We should find a place to rest for a bit," I suggested. "Eat something, review the plan one more time." We found a fallen log to sit on and shared some trail mix and jerky. As we ate, I noticed that Danielle was unusually quiet, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. "You okay?" I asked her. She nodded without looking at me. "It's getting stronger, the pull. It knows we're coming." "Can it see through you somehow?" Nathan asked nervously. Danielle shook her head. "Not anymore, but it can sense me, the same way I can sense it, like a beacon." "Maybe you should stay back when we get closer," I suggested. "If it can influence you—" "No," she said firmly. "I need to be there. I'm the one who can locate the heart of the tree. That's where the fire needs to start or it won't spread properly." I wasn't entirely convinced, but I didn't argue. We'd come too far to start distrusting each other now. After our short rest, we continued on, the forest growing denser and darker around us, the trees taller and older, with the same unnatural spiraling patterns in their bark that we'd noticed during our previous visit. The fungi were back too, those purplish-black mushrooms that seemed to pulse rhythmically. There were more of them now, carpeting the forest floor in patches that grew larger and more frequent as we approached our destination. "Don't step on them," Danielle warned. "They're like its eyes, its nerves in the soil." We carefully picked our way through, avoiding the fungal patches as best we could. The air grew heavier, filled with an earthy, rotting smell that made my eyes water. Strange sounds echoed through the trees. Not quite whispers this time, but a low, pulsating hum that seemed to vibrate in my bones. Finally, we reached the edge of the clearing. We crouched behind a fallen tree and peered out at the scene before us. The massive oak stood at the center, even more imposing and wrong than I remembered. Its bark was almost entirely black now, glistening wetly in the fading light. The face-like protuberances had multiplied, covering every visible inch of the trunk. Some had eyes, real eyes that blinked and swiveled to scan the clearing. Around the base of the tree, dozens of cult members were gathered, their thin bodies swaying in unison to the rhythmic humming that seemed to emanate from the tree itself. They were all marked with the black symbols, their skin pale and waxy, their movements jerky and insect-like. And standing before them all was Magdalena Blackwood, her gray hair now streaked with black, her dress even more tattered than before. She was speaking, her voice carrying clearly across the clearing to where we hid. "The harvest approaches," she proclaimed. "The Devourer's time of awakening is near. 3 vessels were marked, and 1 has been consumed completely, his essence absorbed into the whole. The 2nd fights us still, her will unusually strong, but she will return to us eventually. And the 3rd," she turned to look at a figure kneeling beside her, "the 3rd comes to us of his own accord, of the ancient bloodline, ready to take his rightful place among the faithful." The kneeling figure raised his head, and I felt a jolt of shock. It was a man who looked remarkably like Nathan. Same height, same build, same dark hair, though his face was already partially covered with the beginning of the black markings. "A doppelganger," Nathan whispered beside me. "She found someone who looks like me to trick her followers." "Or a relative," I suggested. "You said your family split. Maybe some cousins stayed behind." Nathan's face hardened. "Then they're no family of mine." We watched as Magdalena placed her hands on the Nathan lookalike's head, chanting in that strange language we'd heard in the whispers. The man's body stiffened, then began to convulse as the black markings spread rapidly across his face and down his neck, disappearing beneath his clothing but presumably continuing across his entire body. When it was done, he rose to his feet, his eyes now completely black, and turned to face the assembled cultists. "I am the voice of the Devourer," he announced in a voice that echoed unnaturally. "Through me, it speaks. Through me, it commands. The time of waiting is ended. The time of spreading has begun." The cultists fell to their knees, pressing their foreheads to the ground in worship. Magdalena remained standing, a triumphant smile on her face. "Now," Danielle whispered, "while they're distracted, we need to get to the tree." "How?" I hissed back. "There are dozens of them, and no cover between here and there." "I'll create a distraction," Nathan said grimly, raising his rifle. "When I start firing into the air, you 2 run for the tree. Get the accelerant in place as fast as you can." I didn't like splitting up, but I couldn't see a better option. I nodded, and Nathan moved a few yards away, finding a position with a clear line of fire but still hidden from the clearing. Danielle and I readied ourselves, shifting our packs to ensure we could run as fast as possible. When Nathan's first shot rang out, the effect on the cultists was immediate and chaotic. They scrambled to their feet, looking around wildly for the source of the noise. Magdalena began shouting orders, pointing in Nathan's general direction. "Now!" I grabbed Danielle's arm and we burst from our hiding place, sprinting across the clearing toward the massive tree. A few cultists noticed us and cried out in alarm, but most were still focused on the continuing gunfire from Nathan's position. We reached the tree, and I nearly retched at the sight of it up close. The eyes were indeed real, blinking and rolling in their gnarled sockets, and what I had taken for a wet sheen on the bark was actually a thick, black sap that oozed continuously from between the face-like growths. The smell was overpowering, rot and decay and something else, something chemical and alien. "Here," Danielle said, pointing to a section of the trunk where the bark seemed to form a natural doorway. "This is the heart. We need to get inside." "Inside?" I echoed incredulously. "You never mentioned anything about going inside the tree." "It's the only way to destroy it completely," she insisted. "We have to burn it from within." Before I could argue further, she placed her hand on the bark doorway, and, to my horror, it opened like a mouth, revealing a dark, pulsating passage into the tree's interior. Without hesitation, Danielle stepped inside. I had no choice but to follow her. The passage was tight and humid, the walls soft and yielding like flesh rather than wood. They seemed to contract around us as we moved deeper, as if the tree itself was breathing. The only light came from a faint, sickly green bioluminescence that emanated from fungal growths along the passage walls. The passage eventually opened into a larger chamber at the heart of the tree. The space was roughly circular, about 15 feet in diameter, with a ceiling that rose up into darkness. The walls were lined with the same face-like growths as the exterior, but here they were larger, more defined, almost like complete human heads embedded in the wood. Some of them were moving, mouths opening and closing as if trying to speak. In the center of the chamber stood a raised dais of gnarled wood, and on it lay what appeared to be a human figure, though it was difficult to make out details in the dim light. Danielle approached it cautiously, and I followed, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. As we got closer, I realized with a shock that the figure was Marcus, or what remained of him. His body was partially embedded in the wooden dais. His limbs melded seamlessly with the tree's substance. His chest was split open, revealing not organs but a complex network of root-like structures that pulsed with an internal light. His eyes were open but completely black, staring sightlessly at the ceiling. "Oh, God," I breathed. "Is he—" "He's gone," Danielle said flatly. "His body is just a conduit now, a root system for the devourer to spread its influence." I swallowed hard, fighting back nausea. "Then let's burn it all." We quickly unpacked our accelerants, gasoline, alcohol, and the thermite charges. We soaked the walls of the chamber and the dais with the flammable liquids, then carefully placed the thermite charges at strategic points Danielle indicated, places where the root system seemed to converge. Just as we were finishing, a commotion echoed down the passage from outside. Shouts, a scream that sounded horribly like Nathan, then rapid footsteps approaching. "They're coming," Danielle said urgently. "We need to light it now and get out." I fumbled with the matches, my hands shaking. Just as I managed to strike one, Magdalena Blackwood stepped into the chamber, followed by the Nathan lookalike and several other cultists. Her face contorted with rage when she saw what we were doing. "Stop them!" she shrieked. The cultists rushed forward. I dropped the match onto the nearest gasoline-soaked section of wall, and flames erupted immediately, spreading rapidly along the accelerant trails we'd laid. Danielle grabbed my arm and pulled me toward a side passage I hadn't noticed before. "This way," she shouted over the suddenly deafening roar of the fire. We ran through the narrow tunnel as the flames spread behind us. I could hear screams from the chamber, Magdalena and her followers caught in the blaze. The passage walls were contracting violently now, the tree trying to seal itself against the fire, but the heat was too intense, the burning too rapid to contain. The side passage led us to another opening in the trunk, away from the main entrance where the cultists had entered. We burst out into the clearing to find it in chaos. The massive tree was already engulfed in flames that burned with unnatural colors, blues and greens mixed with the normal orange and red. Black smoke poured from every crevice in the bark, and a high-pitched keening sound filled the air, the devourer's death cry. Many of the cultists were fleeing into the forest, while others had collapsed to the ground, writhing in agony as the black markings on their skin seemed to come alive, squirming like worms trying to escape burning flesh. "Nathan!" I shouted, scanning the clearing frantically. "Where is he?" We circled the burning tree, keeping our distance from the intense heat, calling Nathan's name. Finally, we found him near where he'd been providing covering fire, lying on the ground, bloodied but conscious, a deep gash across his forehead. "What happened?" Danielle asked as we helped him to his feet. "They flanked me," he groaned. "Too many of them. I had to retreat, but one of them got me with some kind of blade." He touched the wound gingerly. "Is it done? Did you burn it?" As if in answer, a tremendous cracking sound split the air as the great tree began to collapse in on itself, consumed by the unnatural fire. The ground beneath our feet trembled and the keening sound rose to an unbearable pitch before suddenly cutting off. In the sudden silence that followed, we watched as the blazing remains of the tree sank into the earth, leaving a smoking crater where it had stood. The cultists who had been writhing on the ground were now motionless, the black markings flaking off their skin like ash. "We need to get out of here," I said, supporting Nathan's weight as he swayed unsteadily. "Before any of them regroup." We made our way out of the clearing as quickly as we could, following a different path than the one we'd taken in. Danielle again seemed to know instinctively which way to go, leading us unerringly through the darkening forest. Behind us, the fire continued to burn, but it was contained within the clearing, not spreading to the surrounding trees as a normal forest fire would. It took us hours to reach the trailhead where we'd left our car, Nathan growing weaker with each step. His wound had stopped bleeding but looked infected, the skin around it red and swollen. By the time we reached the vehicle, he was barely conscious, his skin burning with fever. We drove straight to the nearest hospital, concocting a story about a hiking accident to explain Nathan's injury. The doctors admitted him immediately, concerned about signs of infection and possible concussion. Danielle and I waited anxiously in the emergency department, exhausted but too wired to rest. "Do you think it's really over?" I asked her quietly. She touched her forehead where the mark had been. "I can't feel it anymore," she said. "The connection is gone. I think we destroyed it, this physical manifestation of it. At least." "This manifestation? You mean there could be others?" Danielle looked troubled. "The journals Nathan found, they suggested the entity was ancient, predating human civilization. Something that old, that powerful. Can it ever truly die? Or does it just go dormant, waiting for the next opportunity? The next group of worshippers to awaken it?" I didn't have an answer for that. We sat in silence until a doctor finally came to update us on Nathan's condition. The infection was responding to antibiotics, she told us, and the wound had been cleaned and stitched. He was resting comfortably and would likely be released within a day or two. Relief washed over me, followed immediately by bone-deep exhaustion. We thanked the doctor and decided to get a motel room nearby to clean up and rest. We were both filthy, covered in dirt, sweat, and bits of the devourer's black sap. In the motel room, I took the first shower, scrubbing my skin almost raw to remove every trace of the tree's residue. When I emerged, Danielle was sitting on one of the beds, staring out the window at the moonlit parking lot. "Your turn," I told her. She nodded absently but didn't move. "Elijah," she said softly, "there's something I need to tell you." I sat down on the other bed facing her. "What is it?" She finally turned to look at me, and in the dim light of the motel room I could see tears in her eyes. "When they marked me, when they started the ritual, I told you I fought it, and that was true, but I didn't tell you everything." My skin prickled with apprehension. "What do you mean?" "The devourer, it showed me things, visions, of what it wanted, what it planned." She drew a shaky breath. "It doesn't just want to consume or destroy, it wants to transform, to remake the world in its image, and it's patient, so patient. What we destroyed tonight was just one small piece of it, one tendril reaching up from somewhere deep beneath the earth." "So it is still alive," I said, my heart sinking. "I think so. Weakened, dormant, maybe, but still there. And there are others like Magdalena out there, other cults serving other manifestations of it." She met my gaze steadily. "This isn't over, Elijah. It might never be over." I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, that we had won, but the conviction in her eyes stopped me. Then what do? We stay vigilant. We watch for signs, and if necessary, we fight it again. She reached across the gap between the beds and took my hand. "But not tonight. Tonight we rest. We've earned that much at least." I squeezed her hand, drawing comfort from its warmth and solidity. We had survived the horror in the woods. We had destroyed the devourer's tree and scattered its followers. Whether or not it was a permanent victory remained to be seen, but for now, it was enough. Danielle went to take her shower, and I stretched out on the bed, too tired to even get under the covers. As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself thinking about Marcus, not the corrupted vessel we'd found inside the tree, but the brilliant, meticulous colleague I'd known before. I wondered if some small part of him had found peace when the tree burned, if his sacrifice had somehow helped us succeed. The last thing I remember before sleep claimed me was the sound of the shower running and Danielle's voice, so faint I might have imagined it, humming a familiar melodic tune, the same humming we'd heard in the ruins when this nightmare began. In my dreams, I saw the burning tree again, collapsing into the earth. But beneath it, deep underground, something vast and ancient stirred, uncoiling slowly from its temporary setback, patient as the mountains, hungry as the void, waiting for its next chance to reach the surface. Waiting for us. I still wake up screaming some nights. My therapist says it will get better with time. Nathan has recovered from his injuries, though he bears a scar on his forehead that will never fade completely. Danielle and I check in with each other regularly, watching for signs, staying vigilant as we promised we would. And sometimes when I walk alone in the woods near my home, I find myself examining the trees more carefully, looking for spiraling patterns in the bark or face-like knots in the wood. I find myself listening for whispers on the wind, for that melodic humming that still haunts my dreams. Because deep down, I know Danielle was right. It's not over. The devourer is patient, and somewhere in the dark places of the world, it waits. My name is Morgan Mitchell. This happened in September 2024. I still don't know if I should be writing this down, but the therapist says it might help. The nightmares haven't stopped. Sometimes I wake up hearing the whispers. Sometimes I think Rufus can still hear them too. It was supposed to be a simple 4-day backpacking trip through the Sipsey Wilderness in Bankhead National Forest. A chance to prove to myself that I could still face the outdoors after the accident. 2 years ago, a climbing anchor had failed while I was scaling a cliff face in Colorado. The 20-foot fall shattered my right leg and left me with a titanium rod and a crippling fear of heights that I refused to acknowledge. My friends had been patient, but I'd pushed them away during recovery, buried myself in work at the Geological Survey office, and turned into someone I barely recognized. The trip was my attempt at rebuilding those connections. Liam had been my best friend since our undergrad days, sticking with me through the worst of my recovery despite my best efforts to isolate myself. Sarah, his girlfriend of 3 years, was an environmental scientist with an encyclopedic knowledge of forest ecosystems. We'd had a falling out the previous year when I drunkenly questioned her research methods at a department party. Not my finest moment. I hoped the trip might help mend that fence too. The drive to Alabama from Nashville took just over 3 hours. Liam's endless enthusiasm filled the car as he recounted stories of the land of 1,000 waterfalls from his previous visits. "You're going to love Sipsey," he said, eyes bright with excitement as he navigated the increasingly narrow roads. "There's nowhere like it. Some of the trees are over 150 years old, and the canyons, absolutely stunning." Sarah nodded, looking up from her guidebook. "The biodiversity is incredible. It's one of the largest wilderness areas east of the Mississippi." Rufus, my German Shepherd mix, sat attentively in the back seat beside me, occasionally placing his head on my lap when he sensed my anxiety spiking as we passed steep roadside drops. I'd adopted him during my recovery, and he'd become my closest companion. More therapy dog than pet, though I'd never admit that to anyone. We reached the Thompson Creek trailhead by early afternoon. The parking area was empty except for a single mud-splattered pickup truck. September was the perfect time for hiking. Warm days, cool nights, and fewer people now that the summer vacation season had ended. We shouldered our packs, I double-checked Rufus's pack containing his food and collapsible bowls, and we set off into the dense forest. The first few hours were everything Liam had promised. Towering hardwoods created a cathedral-like canopy above winding trails carpeted with fallen leaves. Dramatic sandstone bluffs appeared through breaks in the trees, and the sound of rushing water from nearby falls provided a constant, soothing soundtrack. We crossed several shallow creek beds, Rufus eagerly splashing ahead to cool his paws while I carefully navigated the slippery rocks. "See? This is what you've been missing," Liam said, clapping me on the shoulder as we paused at a particularly scenic overlook. "Better than staring at rock samples in your office all day." I had to admit he was right. Something about the wilderness was already working its magic on me. I felt the constant knot of anxiety in my chest beginning to loosen for the first time in months. We made camp in a flat clearing beside the Sipsey River just as the golden afternoon light began to fade. After setting up our tents, one for Liam and Sarah, another for me and Rufus, we gathered firewood and prepared dinner. The tension I'd felt with Sarah seemed to be easing as we worked together. She even laughed at one of my terrible geology puns over freeze-dried stroganoff. But as darkness fell, Rufus grew restless. He paced the perimeter of our campsite, occasionally stopping to stare intently into the darkening forest, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "What's wrong, boy?" I asked, following his gaze but seeing nothing beyond the wall of trees. The forest had grown unnervingly quiet. No insects buzzing, no night birds calling. "Probably just smells a raccoon," Liam suggested, prodding at the campfire with a stick. "Or a deer." I wasn't convinced, but didn't want to seem paranoid on our first night. "Yeah, probably." Later, as we sat around the campfire trading stories and passing a flask of whiskey, my phone chimed with a text message. Surprising, since we'd lost signal hours ago. "That's weird," I said, pulling it from my pocket. The message was from an unknown number. "Get out." I showed it to the others, trying to laugh it off. Someone's idea of a joke? Liam checked his own phone. "I don't have any service. How did you get a text?" I tried calling the number back, but now my phone showed no signal. When I looked at the message again, it had disappeared. "Maybe you imagined it," Sarah suggested, though her voice held a note of uncertainty. "Or it was a delayed message from earlier when we had service." I nodded, but a chill had settled over me that had nothing to do with the night air. Rufus pressed against my leg, his ears alert, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond our fire's reach. That night, I dreamed of whispers, countless voices speaking words I couldn't quite understand, rising and falling like wind through autumn leaves. I woke several times to find Rufus standing rigidly at the tent entrance, hackles raised, a continuous low growl vibrating through his body. "What is it?" I whispered, laying a hand on his tense back. He didn't acknowledge me, just kept staring at the tent flap as if expecting something to tear through it at any moment. I unzipped the tent just enough to peer out. The clearing was bathed in silvery moonlight. Nothing moved. Yet the silence felt pregnant, expectant, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I zipped the tent closed and pulled Rufus back to my sleeping bag, where he remained vigilant until dawn finally broke. At breakfast, I noticed Liam and Sarah looked as exhausted as I felt. "Did you hear anything last night?" I asked, trying to sound casual as I boiled water for coffee. Sarah glanced at Liam before answering. "Like what?" "I don't know. Voices, maybe. Whispering." "I thought that was just me," Liam admitted, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Weird dreams." Sarah frowned. "I kept waking up feeling like someone was watching us." We tried to laugh it off, blaming an unfamiliar environment and the strange acoustics of the forest. But as we packed up camp, I noticed claw marks on a nearby tree, too high and too deep to be from any normal forest creature. I ran my fingers over the gouges in the bark. They were fresh, the wood still oozing sap. Our plan for day 2 was to hike deeper into the wilderness toward a series of waterfalls, but something felt off from the moment we set out. My compass, usually reliable, kept spinning erratically. Liam's GPS app showed us in completely different locations each time he checked it, Even the sun seemed to shift position unnaturally, casting shadows that moved too quickly or in the wrong direction. "This doesn't make sense," Sarah said after we'd been hiking for what felt like hours. According to her watch, it was nearly noon, but mine showed barely past 9. Liam's read 3:15. We should have reached Bee Branch Canyon by now. We stopped for lunch beside a small stream, spreading out the map on a flat rock. Based on the landmarks we'd passed, we should have been following the trail correctly, but nothing matched up with where we thought we were. "Maybe we took a wrong turn," Liam suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. "The trail was clearly marked," I countered, "and it's not like there were many forks." While they debated, I wandered a few yards upstream where Rufus was sniffing intently at something on the bank. It was a backpack, not an unusual sight in a popular hiking area, except this one was torn open, its contents scattered as if someone had left in a tremendous hurry. A sleeping bag lay half unrolled nearby, and a water bottle had been crushed, its plastic warped as if by tremendous pressure. "Guys," I called, "you should see this." They joined me, Sarah crouching to examine the abandoned gear. "This wasn't dropped," she said quietly. "It was ripped apart." She held up the backpack to show long tears along one side, not from catching on a branch or rock, but parallel slashes like claw marks. A tattered journal had spilled from the pack. I picked it up, flipping through pages of nature observations and trail notes until I reached the final entry from just 2 days earlier. Day 4. Something is following us. Jason thinks I'm imagining things, but I know what I saw. It wasn't human. The park rangers never mentioned anything about predators in this area, but whatever left those tracks wasn't a bear or a cougar. We're cutting the trip short, heading back to the trailhead today. "We should report this when we get back," Liam said, examining the site. "Someone might be missing." Sarah nodded, but I could see the concern in her eyes. "Should we head back too?" Liam looked disappointed. "Because of some abandoned gear? Hikers ditch stuff all the time. Maybe they just got spooked by a coyote or something." I was torn. Part of me wanted to suggest turning back, but I didn't want to be the weak link. Again. "Let's keep going," I said finally. "But let's be careful. Stick together." We continued hiking, but the trail grew increasingly difficult to follow. Landmarks that should have been there were missing, while others appeared that weren't on any map. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees growing denser, the undergrowth more tangled. At times, I could swear the path behind us looked different when I glanced back than it had when we walked it moments before. By late afternoon, we reached a clearing we hadn't seen on any map. A perfect circle of treeless ground, perhaps 50 feet across. At its center stood a massive, gnarled oak tree that seemed impossibly ancient, its thick branches reaching out like arthritic fingers. "This is amazing," Sarah said, approaching the tree with professional interest. "This has to be over 200 years old. I wonder why it's not marked on the conservation maps." Rufus refused to enter the clearing. He stood at its edge, ears flat against his head, emitting a high-pitched whine I'd never heard from him before. "What's wrong, buddy?" I tried to coax him forward, but he backed away, tail tucked between his legs. That's when we heard it. A faint call for help coming from beyond the far side of the clearing. A woman's voice, distant but distinct. "Hello," Liam called out. "Is someone there?" The voice came again, weaker this time. "Help. Please." Liam immediately started toward the sound, but I grabbed his arm. "Wait, something's not right." "Someone's hurt," he insisted, pulling away. "We can't just ignore it." Before I could argue further, a figure stumbled into the clearing from the trees, a woman in her early 30s with tangled dark hair and dirt-smudged hiking clothes. She looked exhausted, her face pale except for a smear of blood across one cheek from a shallow cut. "Oh, thank God," she gasped, wavering on her feet. "I thought no one would find me." Liam rushed to help her, leading her to a fallen log where she could sit. Sarah pulled out a first aid kit and began cleaning the cut on the woman's face while I hung back near Rufus, who continued to growl softly. "I'm Eliza," she said between sips from the water bottle Sarah offered. "Eliza Thornhill. I was hiking with friends. But we got separated 2 days ago. I've been trying to find my way back to the trailhead, but I keep getting turned around. It's like the forest doesn't want me to leave." Something about the way she said it, almost amused rather than frightened, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "We're a bit lost ourselves," Liam admitted. "But we've got plenty of supplies. You can stick with us until we find our way out." I wanted to object, but couldn't think of a reasonable way to do so. We couldn't leave her alone in the wilderness, yet something about Eliza set off alarm bells in my mind. Maybe it was the way her gaze lingered too long on each of us, assessing, or how her initial exhaustion seemed to evaporate within minutes of finding us. Or perhaps it was simply that Rufus, who normally loved everyone, refused to go anywhere near her. We decided to make camp in the clearing, though I insisted we set up at its edge rather than near the central oak. As dusk fell and we prepared dinner, I watched Eliza chatting easily with Sarah and Liam. She was charming, full of stories about her work as a freelance photographer specializing in wilderness landscapes, yet details seemed to shift with each telling. How long she'd been lost, where she'd last seen her friends, which trails they'd taken. After dinner, as we sat around the campfire, Eliza asked about our backgrounds. When she learned I was a geologist, her eyes lit up with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "A man who reads the stones," she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "The earth remembers. Doesn't it, Morgan? Every footstep, every drop of blood, the stones record it all." "That's not exactly how geology works," I replied, unsettled by her sudden intensity. She laughed, the sound shrill in the quiet night. "Of course, I'm just being poetic." As the evening wore on, Liam suggested we turn in early to get a fresh start at finding our way back in the morning. I volunteered for the first watch, a precaution we hadn't planned on before meeting Eliza, and sat by the dying fire with Rufus at my side while the others retreated to their tents. The forest seemed alive with shadows that night. Every time I looked away from a particular spot and then back again, I could swear something had moved just beyond the firelight. Rufus remained tense, occasionally growling at nothing I could see. About an hour into my watch, I noticed Eliza emerge from the small one-person tent we'd set up for her. She stood motionless at first, then began walking slowly toward the ancient oak at the center of the clearing. Thinking she might need the bathroom but was disoriented in the dark, I called out softly, "Eliza, everything okay?" She didn't respond or give any indication she'd heard me. Instead, she continued to the massive tree and, I had to blink to make sure I wasn't imagining it, pressed her forehead against its trunk, her lips moving in what looked like silent conversation. I nudged Rufus to stay put and cautiously approached. "Eliza!" When she turned, her face was different, gaunt, with eyes that seemed to reflect the firelight like an animal's. But in a blink, she was normal again, smiling apologetically. "Sorry, did I wake you? I just needed some air. This tree, it's special. Can't you feel it?" "We should get back to the camp," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's not safe to wander at night." "No," she agreed with that same unsettling smile. "It's certainly not safe." I barely slept after waking Liam for his watch. Through the tent fabric, I could see the silhouette of Eliza returning once more to the oak tree while Liam dozed by the fire. I should have woken him, should have said something, but exhaustion finally pulled me under into uneasy dreams. Dawn broke with a heavy mist clinging to the ground, transforming the clearing into an otherworldly landscape. When I emerged from my tent, I found Liam already up, building a small fire for breakfast. Sarah joined us shortly after, but Eliza's tent remained closed. "Should we check on her?" Sarah asked after we'd finished eating and still seen no sign of her. Liam approached the small tent and called Eliza's name. When there was no response, he unzipped the entrance, only to find it empty, the sleeping bag neatly arranged as if it had never been used. "Maybe she went to use the bathroom," Sarah suggested, but we all knew the truth. Eliza was gone. We called for her, searched the immediate area, but found no trace. It was as if she'd simply vanished into the mist. "We need to find our way back," I insisted. "Something's very wrong here." Liam nodded, his earlier enthusiasm replaced by grim determination. "Let's pack up. If we come across a ranger station, we can report her missing." As we broke camp, Liam volunteered to gather more water from a small spring we'd passed on our way into the clearing. "I'll be right back," he promised, grabbing our filtration system and water bottles. Sarah and I continued packing, but as 30 minutes stretched to an hour with no sign of Liam, worry set in. "He should have been back by now," Sarah said, biting her lip. "The spring wasn't that far." We called for him, our voices echoing strangely in the mist-shrouded forest. No response. Just as we were preparing to search for him, crashing sounds came from the undergrowth and Liam stumbled into camp. But something was wrong. His clothes were torn and muddy as if he'd been crawling through the brush. A long scratch ran down one side of his face, crusted with dried blood. Most disturbing of all was his expression. Blank, almost vacant. His usual animated features frozen in an unsettling stillness. "Liam!" Sarah ran to him. "What happened? Are you okay?" He blinked slowly as if having trouble focusing on her. "I'm fine," he said, his voice flat. "Got turned around, that's all." "You've been gone for over an hour," I said, studying him. "And you're hurt." He touched the scratch on his face as if noticing it for the first time. "Must have caught a branch. It's nothing." Sarah cleaned and bandaged the wound while I finished packing. Liam sat unnaturally still throughout, his eyes constantly drifting toward the ancient oak. Rufus kept his distance, watching Liam with the same wariness he'd shown toward Eliza. We set out within the hour, determined to find the main trail back to the trailhead. But something had changed in the dynamic of our small group. Liam, usually our navigator and the one setting our pace, now lagged behind or wandered off the path we were trying to follow. Several times I caught him whispering to himself, falling silent whenever I came within earshot. The forest itself seemed to be working against us. Trails that should have been clearly marked had disappeared under dense undergrowth. Rock formations appeared where none should have been. Familiar landmarks were mysteriously absent. Even the position of the sun offered no reliable guidance, as the sky remained overcast with occasional breaks that showed it in contradictory positions. By mid-afternoon, it became clear we weren't making progress toward the trailhead. In fact, after hours of hiking, we somehow found ourselves back at the same clearing with the ancient oak. "This isn't possible," Sarah said, her scientific certainty clearly shaken. "We've been walking away from this place all day." Liam said nothing, just stared at the oak tree with an expression that resembled longing. When Sarah placed a hand on his arm, he flinched as if her touch burned. "We need to stay here tonight," he finally said. "She'll help us find the way out tomorrow." "She?" I questioned. "You mean Eliza? She abandoned us, Liam?" His head snapped toward me, and for an instant, I didn't recognize the person looking back at me. His eyes were too wide, the pupils constricted to pinpoints despite the dimming light. "She didn't abandon us," he hissed. "She's always here, in the trees, in the stones. You're the geologist. You should know that, Morgan." Sarah and I exchanged worried glances. Something was seriously wrong with Liam. Exposure? A head injury we hadn't noticed? Or something else entirely? We made camp again at the edge of the clearing, as far from the oak as possible. I suggested we take shifts keeping watch through the night, with Rufus as an extra set of eyes and ears. Though exhausted, Sarah agreed immediately. Liam just shrugged, that vacant look returning to his face. During my watch, I found a half-rotted leather journal tucked between the roots of the tree where we'd set up camp. The pages were water-damaged and fragile, but much of the text was still legible. Dated entries from 1882 by a member of a logging expedition. The final pages described experiences eerily similar to our own: disorientation, losing track of time, crew members behaving strangely after going missing briefly, whispers in the night. The final entry was a desperate warning. May God forgive us for what we attempted here. This is no ordinary forest. Something ancient dwells within it, something that was here long before us and resents our intrusion. Jenkins went missing last night. This morning, a creature wearing his face returned to camp. It spoke with his voice, but the words were not his. The others don't believe me. They can't see what I see, the emptiness behind its eyes, the wrongness of its movements. I'm fleeing tonight while I still can. If you are reading this, leave this place. The Whisperer takes your form, your memories, but not your soul, that it keeps for feeding. A chill ran through me as I closed the journal. I'd been ready to dismiss our experiences as a series of coincidences, perhaps exacerbated by getting lost in unfamiliar territory. But this account from nearly 150 years ago matched too closely to be coincidence. I woke Sarah for her watch and showed her the journal. She read it by flashlight, her expression growing more troubled with each page. "This is insane," she whispered. "You don't actually believe this, do you?" I glanced toward Liam's tent where he'd retired shortly after dinner, refusing food. I don't know what to believe anymore. But Liam isn't himself. You've seen it too. She nodded reluctantly. Maybe he hit his head when he got lost earlier. Concussion could explain the personality changes. Maybe, I agreed, though I didn't believe it any more than she did. Just be careful tonight. Wake me if anything happens. I must have been more exhausted than I realized, because despite my anxiety, I fell into a deep sleep as soon as I closed my eyes. I dreamed of roots growing through the forest floor, connecting everything in an invisible network. In the dream, I could see energy pulsing through these connections, flowing from living things into the massive oak at the center of the clearing. And I could hear the whispers again, clearer now, hungry, ancient voices speaking in a language that resonated in my bones rather than my ears. I was jolted awake by Rufus barking frantically and Sarah screaming. Grabbing my flashlight, I scrambled out of the tent to find Sarah backing away from the central oak, her face contorted in terror. Liam stood beside the tree, one hand pressed against its trunk, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. Beside him stood Eliza, smiling serenely. "Sarah," I rushed to her side. "What happened?" "He tried to kill me," she gasped, showing me her forearm where 4 parallel cuts were bleeding freely, not from a knife, but from fingernails or claws. I got up to check on him when I heard voices, and he was standing by that tree with her. When I called his name, he turned and just lunged at me. I quickly dressed her wound with supplies from the first aid kit while keeping an eye on Liam and Eliza. They remained by the tree, watching us with identical expressions of cold curiosity, like scientists observing specimens in a lab. "We need to leave." "Now," I said quietly, helping Sarah to her feet. "Grab only what we absolutely need." "What about Liam?" she asked, her voice breaking. I glanced at the man who had been my best friend. In the moonlight filtering through the trees, his face seemed elongated, his posture wrong, as if his body was being worn by something that didn't quite know how to operate it. "That's not Liam anymore," I said, the truth of it hitting me with sickening clarity. We backed toward our tents, Rufus standing guard between us and the pair by the oak. With trembling hands, we stuffed water bottles, energy bars, flashlights, and my compass into our day packs. "You can't leave," Eliza called, her voice carrying unnaturally in the still night air. "The forest hasn't finished with you yet." "The forest?" Sarah's scientific mind was still trying to make sense of what was happening. "What are you talking about?" Eliza smiled, and in the beam of my flashlight, her teeth looked too numerous, too sharp. "This place has been forgotten by your world, but it remembers the old ways. It requires tribute from those who disturb its peace." "Tribute?" Liam echoed, his voice a hollow imitation of itself. "Like the logging crew, like the hikers before you. The forest feeds. Something clicked in my mind. The journal, the abandoned backpack, Liam's strange behavior after returning from getting water. "The spring," I said to Sarah. "That's where it happened. Whatever this is, it got to him there." A sound came from Liam then. Not quite a laugh, more like branches creaking in a storm. "The geologist figures it out. Yes, Morgan, the water connects everything in this forest. One drink and you're part of the network, part of us." "But you didn't drink from the spring," Eliza said, tilting her head as she studied me. "Pity. It would have been easier." They began moving toward us with the unhurried confidence of predators who know their prey is cornered. Rufus snarled, hackles raised, placing himself between us and them. "Run," I told Sarah, handing her my compass. "Head south. Don't stop, don't look back." "What about you?" she asked, clutching my arm. "I'll be right behind you. Go." She hesitated only a moment before sprinting into the trees. I expected Liam and Eliza to pursue immediately, but they paused, exchanging glances as if silently communicating. "You think you can save her?" Eliza's voice had changed, deeper now, resonating with multiple tones as if several people were speaking at once. "The forest has already claimed her. And you." I backed away, Rufus at my side, searching for an escape route, but I'd made a critical error. In urging Sarah to flee, I'd positioned myself closer to the ancient oak. And now I felt something beneath my feet, movement in the ground itself. Looking down, I saw roots breaking through the soil, writhing like serpents reaching for my ankles. I leaped backward just as a thick root whipped past my leg. Rufus barked a warning as Liam suddenly charged, moving with an unnatural speed and fluidity. I dodged his first lunge but wasn't prepared for how quickly he recovered, spinning and catching me with a backhand blow that sent me sprawling. My training kicked in, the instinct for self-preservation overriding my reluctance to fight my friend. As Liam closed in again, I rolled to my feet and countered with a solid punch to his midsection. It should have doubled him over, but he barely seemed to notice, grabbing my wrist and twisting until I heard something crack. Pain shot up my arm. I stumbled back, cradling my injured wrist as Rufus launched himself at Liam, teeth bared. They went down in a tangle of limbs and snarls. For a moment I thought Rufus might overcome him, but then Liam made a gesture with one hand, and my loyal dog was thrown backward by some invisible force, yelping as he hit the ground. "Stop fighting, Morgan," Eliza said, approaching slowly. "The forest wants you alive. You'll join us, become part of something greater than yourself." While she spoke, I noticed something at the edge of the clearing, a flash of light. Sarah had doubled back instead of running away. She was waving a flashlight, trying to get my attention without alerting our attackers. I needed to buy time. "What happened to the real Eliza?" I asked, backing toward Sarah's position. "Was there ever a real Eliza Thornhill?" The thing wearing Eliza's form smiled. "There was, once, a photographer who came to capture the beauty of the Sipsey wilderness. She became my vessel over 50 years ago. This form has served me well." 50 years? The woman before me couldn't be older than 35. "What are you?" I asked, still retreating slowly. "I am the Whisperer of Sipsey," she replied, spreading her arms. "Guardian of these woods since before your kind built cities, before you cut and burned and scarred the earth. What do you want from us?" Her smile widened, revealing teeth that had grown longer, sharper in the last few minutes. "Life, energy, fear. The forest feeds on it all." I'd nearly reached the edge of the clearing where Sarah waited. Liam was hanging back, watching the exchange with those vacant eyes, occasionally twitching as if receiving instructions. "And Liam, is he gone completely?" Something flickered across Liam's face at the question, a moment of anguish, quickly suppressed. "Parts remain," Eliza admitted. "Enough to make the vessel useful. Memories, instincts, but his will belongs to the forest now." I locked eyes with my friend, or the thing that had once been my friend. Liam, if you're in there, fight it. Remember who you are." For an instant, I thought I saw recognition in his eyes, a flash of the real Liam struggling to surface. But Eliza made a sharp gesture, and his expression went blank again. "Enough," she said. "The forest grows impatient." She raised her arms and the ground trembled. All around the clearing, roots erupted from the soil, writhing like tentacles. The ancient oak itself seemed to twist, its branches reaching down like grasping hands. That's when Sarah burst from the tree line, swinging a burning branch from our campfire. "Morgan, run!" she shouted, thrusting the flame toward Eliza. The entity hissed, recoiling from the fire. In that moment of distraction, I sprinted toward Sarah, Rufus limping behind me. We plunged into the darkness of the forest, the sounds of pursuit close behind. "This way," Sarah gasped, leading me along what appeared to be a game trail. "I found something." We ran until my lungs burned, the beam of Sarah's flashlight bouncing wildly ahead of us. Behind, I could hear unnatural movement through the underbrush. Not the crashing of someone running, but a slithering, undulating sound that made my skin crawl. "There." Sarah pointed to a narrow opening in a rock face partially hidden by vines, the entrance to a small cave. We squeezed inside, the space barely large enough for the three of us. Rufus whimpered softly as I examined him by flashlight, relieved to find his injuries weren't severe, mostly bruising and a small cut on one paw. "What the hell is happening?" Sarah whispered, her face pale in the dim light. "This can't be real." "I don't know," I admitted, wincing as I tried to move my injured wrist. "But we need to get out of this forest. Did you see any signs of the trail when you were looking for me?" She shook her head. Nothing made sense. I tried following my compass south like you said, but it kept leading me in circles. Then I found this cave and thought it might offer some protection. "Smart thinking with the fire," I said. "It didn't like it," she agreed. "That might be our advantage." We fell silent as sounds approached our hiding place. Rustling vegetation, the crack of breaking twigs. Then Liam's voice, unnaturally loud in the quiet forest. "Morgan, Sarah, I know you're near. I can smell your fear." We pressed ourselves deeper into the cave, hardly daring to breathe. A shadow fell across the entrance, elongated, distorted, not quite human-shaped. Then it passed, moving deeper into the forest. We waited until dawn broke before venturing out. The forest looked different in the gray morning light, less threatening but no less confusing. Landmarks I thought I recognized seemed subtly altered, and the position of the sun offered no reliable guidance through the thick canopy. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, clutching the makeshift torch she'd relit from embers we'd carried with us. I closed my eyes, focusing on the sounds around us. Water. I could hear running water to our left. "This way," I said. "If we follow the stream, it has to lead somewhere. All the waterways in Bankhead eventually connect to larger rivers." We walked for hours, following the increasingly wide stream downhill. My wrist throbbed and we were both exhausted and hungry, but hope grew as the terrain began to look more normal. No strange rock formations, no mysteriously circular clearings. Around midday, we emerged onto a wider trail that showed signs of regular use. Boot prints in the mud, an occasional candy wrapper or water bottle cap, evidence of human visitors who had passed through and, presumably, found their way out again. "This has to lead back to a trailhead," Sarah said, her voice lifting with cautious optimism. But our relief was short-lived. As we rounded a bend in the trail, we found Eliza standing in our path, arms crossed casually over her chest. "Did you really think you could simply walk away?" she asked, her voice once again that unnerving, multi-toned resonance. "The forest doesn't release what it claims." Sarah raised her torch, but Eliza merely laughed. "The daylight weakens your little flame. At night, perhaps it might have some power against me. But now—" She made a dismissive gesture and the torch sputtered and died, the wood crumbling to ash in Sarah's hand. We backed away as Eliza advanced. I frantically scanned our surroundings for some advantage, some weapon. The stream had widened into a proper creek beside the trail, its banks steep and muddy. Beyond it rose a sheer cliff face of exposed sandstone, and that's when I had an idea. "Sarah," I murmured, "when I say run, head downstream as fast as you can. Don't stop. Don't look back." "What about you?" she whispered. "I'll be right behind you. Trust me." Eliza tilted her head, studying us with predatory focus. "No more running," she said. "The forest has grown tired of this game." "Now!" I shouted, shoving Sarah toward the downstream path. As she took off running, Rufus at her heels, I grabbed a large rock from the stream bed and hurled it directly at Eliza's face. She caught it in midair, her movements unnaturally quick. But that wasn't my real plan. While she was distracted, I scrambled up the steep bank and began scaling the cliff face beside the trail. Not high, just enough to reach a massive boulder I'd spotted perched precariously near the edge. Pain shot through my injured wrist as I climbed, but adrenaline kept me moving. Below, Eliza realized my intention too late. She screeched, a sound no human throat could produce, and started up the slope after me. I reached the boulder just as her hand closed around my ankle. With my good hand, I grabbed a thick root protruding from the cliff face and kicked hard, connecting with what should have been Eliza's face but felt more like striking wet wood. Her grip loosened just enough for me to pull free. I wedged myself between the boulder and the cliff wall and pushed with every ounce of strength I had left. Years of geological training had taught me to read the landscape, to see the potential energy in every unstable formation, and this one was ready to give way with just a little encouragement. The boulder shifted, teetered, and then broke free in a shower of dirt and smaller rocks. Eliza screamed as the massive stone caught her directly in its path, carrying her down the slope in a devastating landslide that crashed into the creek bed below. I clung to the cliff face, watching as dust billowed up from the impact site. When it cleared, I could see the boulder firmly wedged in the narrow stream bed, water already backing up behind it. Of Eliza, there was no sign except a dark fluid that seeped from beneath the rock, not red like blood, but black as oil, hissing as it met the water. I climbed down carefully and ran downstream after Sarah, half expecting to feel Eliza's grasp on my shoulder at any moment. But nothing pursued me. When I caught up to Sarah and Rufus, they were waiting at a junction where our trail met a wider, clearly marked path. "Did you—" Sarah didn't finish the question, her eyes wide. "I don't think it killed her," I said, breathing hard. "Whatever she is, but I bought us some time." We pressed on with renewed urgency, following the marked trail. The forest around us seemed more normal with each passing mile. Birds sang, insects buzzed, the oppressive silence of the previous days lifted. By late afternoon, we spotted something through the trees that made my heart leap. A ranger station. It wasn't staffed, just a small outpost with emergency supplies and a radio, but it meant we were back in the part of the wilderness that was regularly patrolled. Sarah immediately went to the radio while I searched for a first aid kit to properly bandage my wrist. "Requesting emergency evacuation," I heard Sarah saying into the handset. "2 hikers, minor injuries, lost in the Sipsey wilderness for 3 days." A crackly voice responded, confirming they'd send a team to our location. Sarah gave them coordinates from the map posted on the station wall, then slumped onto a bench, the tension of the past days finally catching up to her. "We made it," she said softly, reaching down to stroke Rufus's head where he lay exhausted at her feet. "But Liam—" I sat beside her, my own exhaustion like a physical weight. "That wasn't Liam anymore. You saw it yourself." "I know," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "But what do we tell people? No one will believe what happened." "We tell them we got separated," I said after a moment's thought. "That we searched but couldn't find him. It's close enough to the truth." Sarah nodded slowly. "And the other things we saw? Would you believe it if someone told you?" I asked. She shook her head, wiping away tears with the back of her hand. No, I was there, and I still can't believe it. We fell silent, the reality of our situation sinking in. We were safe, but at terrible cost. And deep down, I wasn't certain we'd truly escaped. Something about the way that ancient force had spoken through Eliza suggested a power that wouldn't be thwarted so easily, that might have patience beyond human understanding. The rescue team arrived just before dusk, 2 park rangers in a rugged vehicle that could navigate the service roads cutting through parts of the wilderness. They were professional and efficient, asking few questions beyond confirming our identities and the basic details of how we'd become lost. They radioed ahead to have medical staff waiting at the trailhead and began the process of organizing a search for Liam. As we drove out of the forest, I watched the deepening shadows beneath the trees. Just once, I thought I saw a figure standing motionless among the trunks, tall and unnaturally still, its proportions not quite right. Then we rounded a bend, and it was gone. The official search for Liam lasted 2 weeks. They found our original campsite, the clearing with the oak tree, though it looked smaller, less ancient than I remembered, and eventually, the damaged creek bed where I'd triggered the landslide. But of Liam or Eliza, there was no trace. Sarah and I were interviewed multiple times by rangers, local police, and finally FBI agents specializing in missing persons cases. We stuck to our story. We'd become disoriented after our compasses malfunctioned, separated from Liam when he went to refill water bottles, and spent days trying to find him before making our way out. Close enough to the truth to be believable, vague enough to avoid sounding insane. Eventually, the case went cold. Liam became another statistic, one of dozens who disappear in national wilderness areas each year. Sarah moved away, taking a research position at a university on the West Coast. We kept in touch but rarely discussed what had happened in the Sipsey wilderness. Some experiences create a bond that doesn't need words. I still live in Nashville, still work as a geologist, though I've shifted my focus from fieldwork to lab analysis. I haven't gone hiking or camping since we returned. Some nights I still wake to those whispers, the sound of them clearer in my dreams than they ever were in the forest. Rufus remains vigilant. Sometimes he growls at empty corners of the room or refuses to enter certain spaces in the house. Last spring, I found a small oak sapling growing in my backyard, though I'd planted no trees. When I tried to uproot it, its leaves rustled despite the still air. I left it alone. Yesterday, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a framed photograph of the Sipsey wilderness, a beautiful shot of sun-dappled trees and a winding stream. The composition was professional, artistic. When I turned it over, I found a handwritten note on the back. The forest remembers. Morgan, it is patient. It waits. Perhaps next time you'll stay for good. It was signed simply, E.T. I burned the photograph, but the image is seared into my memory. And sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I feel roots creeping through the soil beneath my house, searching, reaching, biding their time. The forest is patient, and I know with bone-deep certainty that it isn't finished with me yet.